The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation. The large, polished wood paneling of the room seemed to absorb the collective nervous energy of everyone inside. Lawyers, witnesses, journalists, all eyes were focused on one person, Elon Musk. At the heart of a high-profile lawsuit, Musk sat at the defense table, calm and collected. His fingers drummed lightly on the armrest of his chair, and his gaze flickered briefly toward the judge. A slight smile tugged at his lips, as though he were in on a secret no one else could see. The billionaire tech mogul didn't need to speak to command attention. But today, he was about to find himself at the center of a battle far more personal than any boardroom confrontation. It wasn't about rockets or electric cars, it wasn't about the billion-dollar empire he had built. It was about his reputation. And someone who had a lot of power in this courtroom, was about to try to tear it down. "You may begin, Mr. Musk," the judge said, his voice sharp and condescending. Judge Harvey Thompson, known for his biting sarcasm and his ability to turn even the simplest of cases into a spectacle, leaned back in his chair, eyeing Musk with clear disdain. Elon didn't respond immediately. His eyes, cool and measured, met the judge's glare. There was no sign of the usual fire that burned in the eyes of most people who found themselves in this position. The judge had expected Musk to snap, to retaliate with the kind of arrogance and bombastic rhetoric that billionaires often resorted to. But instead, Musk simply adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, his expression unreadable. The room seemed to grow quieter, as if everyone knew a storm was coming, but no one could guess what form it would take. Judge Thompson, growing impatient, leaned forward. "You're not here to play games, Mr. Musk. This isn't one of your little startups where you can push people around and get your way. The world doesn't revolve around you, no matter how much you may think it does." The words hung in the air, thick with judgment. Musk's lawyer, a well-dressed man named Richard Danvers, glanced at his client, obviously unsettled by the personal attack. He opened his mouth to interject, but Musk held up a hand to stop him. It wasn't his style to let someone else fight his battles. Elon's voice, when he spoke, was calm and deliberate. "Judge, I'm not here to play games. But if you're interested in a game of wits, I'd be happy to oblige." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. It was a daring retort, one that caught even Judge Thompson off guard. The judge's face reddened, a mixture of anger and surprise flashing across his features. He was used to intimidating people with his sharp words, but this time, he had underestimated the man sitting in front of him. "Mr. Musk, you've made quite a name for yourself in the tech world," Judge Thompson sneered. "But this isn't Silicon Valley. We have rules here. And you're not above them. Don't think you can just waltz in and buy your way out of this one." Elon tilted his head slightly, the faintest trace of a smile still lingering on his lips. "I never thought I could buy my way out of anything, Judge. But I do think I've learned a few things along the way. You might be surprised at what I know about rules." The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Musk wasn't backing down. He wasn't the kind of man who shied away from a challenge, and today would be no different. The room was full of people who expected Musk to either shrink under the pressure or lash out in anger, but instead, he seemed to be enjoying this. There was no hint of fear in his posture, no sign of discomfort in his tone. He was in control, even as the judge continued to push his buttons. Judge Thompson's eyes narrowed, the challenge clear in his gaze. "Is that so, Mr. Musk? Well, let's see how well you know the rules of this courtroom. I suggest you get used to the idea that not everyone is going to roll out the red carpet for you just because you have a few $1 billion to your name." Musk's smile didn't falter. "I never asked for a red carpet. But thank you for offering one." A collective gasp echoed through the room. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the delivery. Musk hadn't shouted, he hadn't even raised his voice. He simply spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly how to handle this situation. And in that moment, Judge Thompson realized that this was no ordinary courtroom encounter. As Musk sat back in his chair, the room fell into a tense silence. The judge fumbled with his papers, trying to regain his composure. Musk hadn't just stood up to him, he'd subtly flipped the script. What was supposed to be a straightforward exchange had turned into a game of mental chess. The judge had underestimated Musk, and now it was too late to take back what had already been said. It wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. It was a battle of wits, a contest of who could stay calm under pressure, and who would falter when the heat was on. The tension was almost unbearable, and yet, Musk remained an enigma. His calmness was infuriating, but it was also strangely magnetic. The more Judge Thompson tried to dig into him, the more Musk seemed to thrive. The media cameras flashed, capturing every moment of this exchange. The public was watching, and they were starting to see the true Musk, a man who didn't need to shout or show off to make an impact. He was a force in his own right, and no amount of insults or ridicule could diminish that. Musk leaned forward slightly, his eyes still locked on the judge. "You said you weren't impressed with me, Judge. But I'm not here to impress you. I'm here because you tried to insult me and my work. And I'm not going to let that slide." A tense moment passed before Judge Thompson spoke again, his voice tinged with frustration. "Very well, Mr. Musk. Let's get on with it." But Musk had already won. The rest of the courtroom now saw that this battle wasn't about the lawsuit, it was about something far more profound. It was about respect. And as the proceedings continued, the world would soon learn that Elon Musk wasn't just a businessman, he was a man who could take on even the most powerful figures and leave them second-guessing their every move. But how long would it take for the judge to regret what he had just said? Musk wasn't about to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing him lose his cool. And Judge Thompson, well, he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He would regret his words. But it would take just 7 minutes before the full weight of that regret would hit him harder than he could have ever imagined. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk wasn't born into wealth or privilege. His story, like many others, began with hardship and a relentless drive to prove himself against overwhelming odds. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971, Elon's early life was a far cry from the billionaire tech mogul that the world would one day come to know. His parents, Errol and May Musk, were both highly educated individuals, but their relationship was turbulent. Elon's father, a man of sharp intellect but difficult personality, often clashed with his son, creating an emotionally charged home environment. At a young age, Elon exhibited traits that would later define his success: an intense curiosity, an ability to focus, and an unyielding persistence. But growing up in South Africa during the apartheid era was far from easy. Elon often found himself the target of bullying, a byproduct of his eccentric personality and interests. He was the kid who devoured books about science and technology, the boy who spent hours tinkering with anything mechanical. He would get lost in his world of ideas, and the other kids at school didn't know what to make of him. It wasn't long before Elon's intellect began to shine. By the time he was 12, he had taught himself computer programming and developed his first software, an incredible feat for a young boy in the 1980s. His first entrepreneurial venture was a game called Blaster, which he sold for $500. It was a small step, but it was a crucial one. It planted the seeds for what would eventually become a multi-billion-dollar empire. Despite his early success, Elon's relationship with his father remained strained. Errol, a man known for his arrogance and bitterness, made it clear that he didn't think much of his son's ambitions. He often belittled Elon's ideas, dismissing them as childish fantasies. It wasn't until years later, when Elon had already launched his first major business venture, Zip2, that he began to recognize how deeply his father's harsh criticism had affected him. Elon's mother, on the other hand, was a different story. May Musk, a model and dietitian, was a source of inspiration and encouragement. While she didn't have the same technical knowledge as her son, she recognized his potential and did her best to support him, even if that meant sacrificing her own comfort to send him to better schools. She understood that Elon had a different way of thinking, and she never tried to stifle it. Instead, she let him explore his passions, believing that one day, those passions would lead him to greatness. At the age of 17, Elon made the life-changing decision to leave South Africa and move to Canada. He wanted to escape the suffocating atmosphere of his homeland and build a future in a place where opportunity was abundant. He enrolled at Queen's University in Ontario and began his studies in physics and economics. However, his time in Canada was short-lived. Just 2 years later, he transferred to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States, where he earned degrees in both economics and physics. But it wasn't his academic achievements that truly set Elon apart, it was his vision. Musk's dreams were not confined to the borders of a classroom or the limitations of conventional thought. He saw a future where humanity would not only conquer Earth but would also venture to the stars. And that vision would soon take shape in the form of his first groundbreaking ventures. After completing his studies, Elon dove into the world of tech entrepreneurship. He co-founded Zip2, a software company that provided online city guides for newspapers. Though it was a modest start, it was just the beginning. In 1999, he sold Zip2 to Compaq for $307 million. With the proceeds from the sale, he founded X.com, which later became PayPal, revolutionizing online payments. PayPal's success would cement Elon's status as one of the most innovative minds of his generation, and it would ultimately pave the way for his future ventures. However, despite his growing wealth and recognition, Elon's journey was far from easy. He faced personal challenges, including multiple failed relationships, the pressure of running multiple high-profile companies, and the constant public scrutiny that came with being one of the wealthiest men on the planet. But what set Elon apart from many others was his unshakable belief in his ability to change the world. He was willing to risk everything, including his fortune, to pursue the innovations he believed would define the future. In 2002, Elon took his boldest leap yet. After selling PayPal to eBay for $1.5 billion, he founded SpaceX, with the goal of reducing the cost of space travel and making human life multiplanetary. It was a venture that many considered outlandish, even impossible. But Musk was undeterred. SpaceX struggled in its early years, facing multiple failed rocket launches and near bankruptcy. However, Elon's determination and relentless work ethic ultimately paid off. In 2008, SpaceX successfully launched its first Falcon 9 rocket, proving that private companies could indeed compete with government space agencies. By then, Tesla Motors had become another cornerstone of Musk's empire. He had joined the company in 2004, bringing his vision of electric cars that didn't just meet the market's needs but surpassed them. Tesla's rise to prominence, like SpaceX's, wasn't without setbacks. There were production delays, financial troubles, and constant skepticism from both investors and the media. But through it all, Musk never wavered. He knew that the world's future depended on sustainable energy and advanced technology. Yet for all his successes, Elon's journey was not without personal turmoil. His relationships with his first wife, Justine Musk, and later with actress Tallulah Riley, faced challenges that were difficult to navigate in the spotlight. Musk's personal life became the subject of intense media scrutiny, with tabloids constantly speculating about his marriages and divorces. The pressure weighed on him, but he continued to push forward, his focus never deviating from his ultimate goal, to ensure the future of humanity was secure, sustainable, and technologically advanced. But even Musk's incredible intellect and accomplishments couldn't shield him from the more personal challenges in his life. His mother, May, had always been his pillar of support, and though they had grown closer over the years, the emotional scars left by his father's harshness remained. Those early years in South Africa shaped Musk in ways even he didn't fully understand. They fueled his desire to prove himself, to rise above the limitations others placed on him. His father's disapproval, coupled with his personal struggles, became the silent forces that pushed him to outdo himself time and again. Now, here he was, sitting in a courtroom, facing yet another challenge. It was a far cry from the chaos of launching rockets or building electric cars. But this was no less important. This lawsuit wasn't about technology or the future, it was about his personal reputation. And Elon Musk wasn't about to let anyone walk over him. The judge may have thought he had power, but Elon had something far more potent: the strength of his character, the depth of his experiences, and a brilliant mind that had never failed him. As he sat there, reflecting on his journey, on the pain, the triumphs, the constant battle to redefine what was possible, Elon Musk couldn't help but smile. The judge didn't know it yet, but today wasn't just another day in court. This was just another moment in a lifetime of overcoming the odds. And this time, the odds were about to catch up to the judge. The tension in the courtroom had only grown stronger since Elon's sharp retort to Judge Thompson's insults. The judge, who had initially dismissed Musk as just another arrogant billionaire, now realized that this wasn't going to be a typical case. In fact, it had already begun to spiral beyond what anyone had expected. It wasn't about the lawsuit anymore. It wasn't about the petty details of the case they were there to litigate. This was about power, ego, and the clash between two very different personalities. Judge Thompson had a reputation for being a tough, no-nonsense authority figure. He was known for his sharp tongue and disdain for those who thought they could bypass the rules just because they had money or influence. In his eyes, Musk embodied everything he despised: arrogant, untouchable, and completely dismissive of the power of the law. He wasn't about to let Musk walk out of this courtroom with his dignity intact. But the problem was that Musk wasn't like most people. The more the judge pushed, the more the billionaire seemed to thrive. Musk wasn't here to play by anyone's rules but his own. His silence, his cool composure, it was all part of a strategy. And it was working. As the morning wore on, the lawyers went back and forth, arguing over the specifics of the case. But Musk's thoughts were elsewhere. He wasn't paying attention to the legalities of the case, he was focused on Judge Thompson. The judge's arrogance, his condescension, had triggered something inside him. Musk had faced challenges from all corners of the world, from the brightest minds to the most powerful corporations. But nothing had been as personally aggravating as this. It wasn't about the case, it was about standing up to someone who thought they could break him. Musk's lawyer, Richard Danvers, continued to argue on his behalf, his voice rising in volume as he tried to navigate the court's labyrinthine procedures. Elon barely noticed. His mind was already racing, planning his next move. Meanwhile, Judge Thompson was growing increasingly frustrated. He had expected Musk to cave under pressure, to fold the moment he was publicly humiliated. Instead, Musk seemed to absorb every insult with the same cool detachment, like a man who had seen it all before. The judge had underestimated him. "Mr. Musk," Judge Thompson's voice rang out, sharp and cutting. "Are you even listening to these proceedings, or do you just plan to continue sitting there, mocking the entire judicial process?" Musk's gaze lifted slowly, his eyes locking with the judge's. "I'm listening, Judge. You've been speaking for the past hour. I'm just waiting for you to say something worth hearing." The courtroom fell silent. The air was thick with tension, and every pair of eyes in the room was now trained on Elon Musk. His words were not a simple insult, they were a declaration of defiance. He had just publicly dismissed the judge's authority. For someone who prided himself on his composure, this was a rare moment of openness. It was clear that Musk wasn't going to let this judge walk all over him. The judge's face flushed with a deep shade of red. "You think this is a game, Mr. Musk? You think you can walk in here and treat the law like a joke?" His voice shook with anger, but there was a slight tremor in his words that betrayed the crack in his armor. Elon didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. There was a stillness to him that was almost unnerving. "I'm not here to play games. I'm here because you've insulted me, and now you're insulting my entire company. I didn't come here for you to waste my time and undermine everything I've built. If you're not going to take this seriously, then I'll walk out and take my case elsewhere." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, it seemed like the entire courtroom held its breath. The idea that Elon Musk would simply walk away from a high-stakes lawsuit was almost laughable to most people. And yet, there was something in his tone, something in the absolute certainty of his words, that made it clear he was serious. Judge Thompson's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. The thought of losing control of this case, of losing face in front of the public, was unbearable. He had made a name for himself as a tough, unyielding judge, and the last thing he wanted was for Musk to get the upper hand. This was about far more than the lawsuit, it was about dominance, about proving that he was the one who called the shots. You think you can just leave? Judge Thompson spat, clearly rattled. I've got you here, Mr. Musk. And no matter how much you try to play the victim, you're not going anywhere. Elon's smirk was subtle, but it was there. You're mistaken, Judge. You think you have power here. But the truth is, this court, this system, it all works for me. Not the other way around. A murmur rippled through the room. Some of the onlookers exchanged looks, their curiosity piqued. Musk wasn't just responding with confidence, he was undermining the very foundation of the judge's authority. For a man like Thompson, who had built his career on being the ultimate authority, the implications of Musk's words were damning. But Musk wasn't finished. He wasn't just here to prove that he could take down a judge in a public forum, he was here to make a statement. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest, his gaze unwavering. You've made a mistake today, Judge, Elon said, his voice steady, cold. And you'll regret it sooner than you think. The words were like a challenge, a direct threat wrapped in the calmest of tones. The judge, visibly shaken, glared at Musk, but he couldn't respond. He couldn't think of anything to say that would regain the upper hand. Musk had already won this round, and it wasn't even close. The judge banged his gavel, trying to regain some semblance of control. We will resume after a short recess. As the courtroom broke into chatter, Elon Musk remained still, his eyes fixed ahead. He wasn't thinking about the recess, he was thinking about the larger picture. This wasn't just about winning this case, it was about sending a message, not just to the judge, but to everyone watching. No one, no matter how powerful, could underestimate him or the influence he wielded. He wasn't going to let anyone off the hook for crossing him. As Musk stood up and turned toward his lawyer, Richard Danvers leaned in, his voice a low whisper. That was something. I've never seen you go after a judge like that before. Elon didn't smile. He needed to be reminded of something. I'm not just any billionaire, and I won't let anyone treat me like one. The courtroom buzzed with whispers after the recess. Everyone had seen the confrontation between Elon Musk and Judge Thompson, but few had fully grasped what had just transpired. The judge, typically unshaken by even the most difficult cases, had visibly lost control. His authority had been questioned, and more troubling for him, Musk had made it clear that he wasn't intimidated by the court's power. As the gavel came down again, signaling the end of the break, Musk sat calmly, his expression unchanging. He had already decided that this case would end on his terms. But what happened next was something no one saw coming. When Judge Thompson returned to the bench, his demeanor had shifted. Gone was the arrogance, the venom in his voice. He now seemed uncertain. Musk noted the change immediately. The judge had always been a man of absolute authority, but now, it was as if he was reconsidering the battle he had chosen. Mr. Musk, Judge Thompson began, his tone significantly less hostile than before, I would like to apologize for my previous conduct. I overstepped my boundaries. There was a subtle hesitation in his voice, but the words were there, clear and direct. A wave of silence swept over the courtroom. Was this really happening? A judge apologizing to a defendant, especially someone as high-profile as Musk? It was almost unheard of. Musk, however, didn't flinch. He had seen people backpedal before, but this apology was unexpected. And perhaps more importantly, it was strategically calculated. Musk knew what it meant, the judge was realizing that his actions had been a mistake, and he was trying to salvage the situation before it escalated further. Musk raised an eyebrow, his response poised and calculated. Thank you, Judge. But apologies don't fix the damage already done. You insulted not just me, but the entire ethos of innovation and progress that I stand for. The judge's apology was genuine, but Musk wasn't here to simply accept it. He wasn't here to play nice or to pretend that everything was fine. He wanted the judge to know that this was more than just a personal affront. This was about something much bigger than any individual. I understand, Mr. Musk, Judge Thompson said, his voice still steady but lacking the same force it had had before. But please, let us move forward with the proceedings. Musk tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into a slight smirk. You want to move forward? Fine. But know this, Judge. I'm not the kind of person who lets things slide. I don't forget when people cross lines. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, and the audience could feel the weight of the unspoken challenge hanging in the air. Elon had just reset the playing field, reminding the judge, and everyone else in the courtroom, that power wasn't just about the position you held, but how you used it. Musk had already seen through the judge's power play. Now, the ball was in his court. The judge cleared his throat, his attempt at regaining control of the situation evident in the sharpness of his voice. Let us get back to the matter at hand. We're here for a trial, not a personal duel. Musk nodded, but he couldn't resist a small, almost imperceptible chuckle. Oh, I agree. But when it comes to matters of principle, sometimes it's hard to separate personal from professional. It wasn't lost on anyone in the room that Musk had just managed to turn a courtroom confrontation into a statement about integrity, his integrity, and the values that drove him. Whether or not the judge admitted it, the apology had come too late. The real battle, Elon knew, was yet to come. The rest of the afternoon unfolded with the kind of tension one might expect in a dramatic thriller. The case itself was pushed aside, as Musk's earlier statements continued to echo in everyone's minds. The lawyers presented their cases, but no one was truly listening. The real drama was unfolding in the minds of the onlookers. How was this going to end? Would Musk win, not just the case, but the respect of the courtroom? Or would Judge Thompson find a way to claw back his authority? As the proceedings continued, it became increasingly clear that the dynamics of the courtroom had changed. Judge Thompson, despite his previous bravado, found himself on the back foot. Musk wasn't just fighting the case, he was dismantling the very foundation of the judge's authority. Then, as if on cue, something else happened. A surprise witness, someone Musk had never anticipated calling to the stand, was brought into the room. The doors opened, and a tall figure in a suit walked briskly to the witness stand. The crowd shifted, leaning forward in curiosity. It was none other than someone Musk had worked with years ago, someone who had a history with both Musk and the case at hand. The witness was well known in legal and business circles, and the very fact that he had been called to testify added a layer of mystery and intrigue to the proceedings. He had knowledge of the case, yes, but what he knew was more than just legal, it was personal. Mr. Lyle Donovan, the lawyer for the opposing side said, "I'd like to call you to testify." Elon's heart skipped a beat. Lyle Donovan? What was he doing here? Lyle had been one of Musk's early investors in PayPal. The two had a complicated history, one that wasn't exactly a chapter Musk liked to revisit. Donovan was known for his cutthroat business tactics and his fallout with Musk years ago. If anyone could turn the tide against him, it was Lyle. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as Lyle took his seat. His cold, calculating eyes met Elon's for the briefest moment, a silent acknowledgement of the complex history between them. There were no pleasantries, no small talk. This was business, strictly business. Mr. Donovan, the lawyer continued, can you tell the court about your experience working with Mr. Musk and your thoughts on the matter at hand? Lyle's lips curled into a half-smile. Well, I don't know about the legal details of this case, but I can tell you this. Elon Musk is a man who doesn't just aim to win. He aims to change the rules entirely. He paused, eyes narrowing as he looked directly at Musk. And I'm not sure if that's something you'll find all that agreeable, Judge. The courtroom held its breath again. The stakes had just been raised. This wasn't just a case anymore. This was a showdown, a clash between two heavyweights, one with his personal reputation on the line, and the other with the ambition to change everything. Musk leaned back in his chair, his mind already calculating his next move. He had faced worse odds, survived greater challenges. But today, the journey had taken an unexpected turn. And somehow, Musk felt more confident than ever before. The rules of this game had just changed. The tension in the courtroom had reached a fever pitch. With Lyle Donovan on the witness stand, every word he spoke seemed to carry more weight than the last. Musk had never anticipated Donovan's involvement in this case. Their history was one Musk preferred to keep buried in the past, but now it was all being laid out in front of him, and the judge, and the public. Lyle's testimony was nothing short of devastating. He was methodical, calm, and composed, as he outlined every misstep Musk had ever made in their business partnership. He spoke about the early days of PayPal, about the struggles, the disagreements, and eventually, their fallout. He described Elon as difficult, visionary but unpredictable, and, most biting of all, he alluded to moments where Musk's decisions were borderline reckless. "Mr. Musk," Lyle said, his eyes never leaving the billionaires, "I respect his vision, but let's not forget the cost of that vision. It's one thing to be a genius, it's another to run a company into the ground because of stubbornness and pride." The word stung more than Musk wanted to admit. His mind flashed back to those days, to the early struggles, to the fights they'd had over control of the company. But the truth was, those battles had shaped him into the person he was today, someone who never gave up, who refused to let obstacles stop him. To see Lyle paint it all in such a negative light, to make it seem like nothing but failure, was like a slap in the face. Judge Thompson leaned forward, clearly intrigued by Lyle's account. "Mr. Musk," he said, directing his gaze at Elon for the first time since the recess, "how do you respond to these accusations? Are they true?" For the first time in the entire trial, Elon felt something close to unease. It wasn't because he was guilty, he had nothing to hide, but the attack on his character, on his past, had taken a toll. The entire courtroom seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for his response. Elon sat up straighter, his mind racing as he weighed his options. He had always believed in the power of silence, of letting others talk while he made his next move. But Lyle had pushed him into a corner. If he didn't respond now, he would look weak. If he did, he risked appearing defensive. There was no easy way out of this. Taking a deep breath, he finally spoke, his voice steady but carrying the weight of everything he had been through. "Lyle's right about one thing," Musk said, his words cutting through the thick tension. "I've made mistakes. I've made plenty of them. But they've never been mistakes of the heart. I didn't build Tesla, SpaceX, or anything else just to fail. I did it because I believe in what I'm doing. I've never been afraid to fail as long as I'm failing forward." The courtroom fell silent. Musk's words hung in the air, his voice unwavering. It was clear that he wasn't trying to win sympathy, but rather reaffirm his own convictions. His success wasn't due to luck, it was due to his relentless belief that failure was just a stepping stone to something greater. The room had heard his vulnerability, and in that moment, they couldn't help but respect the honesty in his words. "I've been knocked down more times than I care to count," Musk continued. "But I've always gotten back up. And I've always kept pushing forward, because that's the only way to build something truly great." Lyle looked at him, his expression unreadable. Musk knew that Donovan wasn't going to back down. Lyle was a businessman, not a philosopher. He didn't understand the soul behind the vision. But Musk had just made a statement that went beyond the case at hand, it was a statement about who he was and why he did what he did. Judge Thompson sat back, his expression difficult to read. He'd been watching Musk carefully throughout the entire trial, and for the first time, he seemed to be considering the man in front of him not just as a defendant, but as a person. There was something in Elon's words, in the calm confidence he carried, that had made the judge question his own assumptions. But the emotional climax wasn't just about Musk's defense, it was about the moment when the truth became undeniable. The truth that while Musk had faced countless setbacks, he had never been defeated. The truth that the world hadn't always been kind to him, but he had found a way to succeed despite the odds. And the truth that sometimes, people who dare to dream big must also face the harshest critics. The trial proceeded with much less intensity after that. The mood in the courtroom had shifted. Judge Thompson, no longer wielding his previous hostility, seemed almost contemplative. He took longer pauses before speaking, his eyes shifting from his notes to Musk and back again. It was clear that Musk's testimony had affected him more than he had expected. The judge was a man of principles, yes, but he wasn't impervious to the rawness of the truth. As the day wore on, the defense team began to sense that the tide was turning in Musk's favor. The accusations made by Lyle had been powerful, but Musk's personal testimony had been even more powerful. It wasn't about defending his company or his decisions anymore. It was about defending the very foundation of who he was, the relentless drive to innovate, to push boundaries, and to never give up, no matter how many people tried to tear him down. The closing statements came, and the opposing lawyer, having exhausted their arguments, couldn't quite capture the same emotional weight that Musk's testimony had carried. There was no denying it, Musk had won this round. The judge, still contemplative, gave one final look at the defendant before turning to the rest of the courtroom. "We will adjourn for the day," Judge Thompson announced. "Closing statements will be heard tomorrow." As the courtroom emptied, Musk stood up and walked toward his team. He didn't smile, didn't offer any words of triumph. There was no need. He knew the battle wasn't over. But for the first time in this case, he felt like he had regained control, not just of the case, but of the narrative. As Elon left the courtroom, the weight of the day's events settled on his shoulders. It had been a long and emotional journey, one that had tested his resolve. But he had faced down the truth, and in doing so, he had forced everyone to confront it. The next day would bring the final verdict. But for now, Elon Musk had gotten the last laugh. The courtroom was buzzing with anticipation as the final day of the trial arrived. The tension was palpable, the air thick with the unspoken question on everyone's mind: would Elon Musk get the justice he deserved, or would his opponents find a way to bring him down? Musk walked into the courtroom, his stride confident, but his mind was running at 100 miles an hour. The last few days had been grueling, but they had also been revealing. For the first time in a long while, he had truly confronted not just the case, but the very essence of who he was, the man who had pushed boundaries, taken risks, and stood firm in the face of adversity. It had all come down to this, the final verdict. Judge Thompson entered the courtroom with a solemn expression, his usual sternness now tempered with something else, something Musk couldn't quite place. It wasn't respect, but perhaps recognition. The judge had heard Musk's story. He had heard the truth, raw and unfiltered. And now, he was about to make a decision that could change everything. Musk had been prepared for the worst, but he still couldn't shake the feeling that something was different now. The judge's apology had been the first crack in the armor, and since then, things had shifted. The once hostile courtroom had evolved into something more neutral, even somewhat sympathetic toward Musk. The proceedings began, and everyone in the room fell silent as the judge addressed the court. After careful consideration of all the evidence presented, the arguments made, and the testimonies heard, I have come to a conclusion, Judge Thompson began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his decision. This case is not just about legalities, it is about the broader context of innovation, responsibility, and the consequences of one's actions. And it is also about character. The word seemed to linger in the air, hanging heavy with meaning. Musk felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't sure what was coming, but he knew it was going to be decisive. The accusations levied against Mr. Musk are serious, Judge Thompson continued, his gaze shifting from the defense table to the jury and then back to Elon. And while I do not condone some of the decisions made during his career, I must also acknowledge the undeniable impact of his contributions to technology, industry, and society at large. Musk couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Was the judge about to side with him? Could it be? Therefore, the judge said, drawing the words out for what seemed like an eternity, I find that while Mr. Musk may not have been perfect in his business practices, the overall impact of his work, particularly in fields like space exploration and renewable energy, warrants a degree of leniency. The court acknowledges his efforts, his vision, and his drive to push humanity forward. A murmur spread throughout the courtroom. It wasn't a full victory, not yet, but the judge's words were enough to indicate that Musk had regained some ground. The judge wasn't dismissing the case entirely, but he was recognizing Musk's contributions in a way that no one had expected. The trial had started with Musk as the underdog, with the odds stacked against him. Now, it seemed that the tides were turning. However, Judge Thompson added, his tone becoming more serious, there are still lessons to be learned. Mr. Musk is not exempt from the consequences of his actions. The court will impose a fine for the damages incurred during this case, and I advise that he reflect on the gravity of the decisions he has made in the past. A collective sigh seemed to escape the room. The fine wasn't insignificant, but it was far less than what many had expected. Musk's eyes narrowed. It wasn't the outcome he had envisioned, he had hoped for more than just a slap on the wrist, but it was still a victory of sorts. The judge had essentially acknowledged his worth, his contributions, and the larger context of his work. It was a win, even if it wasn't the grand slam he had wanted. As the judge wrapped up his statement, he turned his attention to Musk directly. Mr. Musk, you are a man who has altered the course of history. But with that power comes responsibility. I trust that you will continue to use your influence for the betterment of society, keeping in mind the ethical implications of your actions. This court is adjourned. With that, the gavel came down, signaling the end of the trial. The room erupted in a mixture of applause and chatter. Musk sat there for a moment, his hands clenched on the table. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He had won, yes, but it hadn't been easy. And it certainly hadn't been perfect. As the courtroom emptied, Musk remained seated, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about the accusations, the legal battles, and the personal attacks. But more than that, he thought about the larger picture, the reason he'd fought so hard in the first place. It wasn't just about winning a case or proving a point. It was about the vision, the future, the change he was trying to bring into the world. When his team gathered around him, congratulating him on the outcome, Musk merely nodded. He wasn't interested in the applause. He had done what he needed to do, but the work was far from over. The road ahead was still long, and there would always be more challenges. There would always be people who doubted him, who tried to hold him back. But in that moment, Musk was reminded of something important. The fight wasn't about silencing the critics, it was about making sure the world could hear the vision he was trying to create. As he walked out of the courtroom, his mind already turning to the next challenge, Musk felt a sense of resolve. He had faced adversity, but more importantly, he had faced himself. And in the end, he had emerged stronger, more determined than ever. The trial was over. But for Elon Musk, the journey was just beginning. The courtroom doors slammed shut behind him as Elon Musk walked into the bright sunlight outside, the weight of the past week lifting from his shoulders, but not without leaving its mark. He didn't smile or wave to the crowd of reporters gathered outside. He didn't need to. He was used to the attention, the flashes of cameras, the invasive questions, but today, there was something different. Today, he felt a profound sense of relief mixed with something more, something deeper. The trial was over, the verdict delivered, but the echoes of the courtroom would stay with him for a long time. His victory, if it could even be called that, was bittersweet. Yes, the judge had been lenient, but that didn't erase the fact that Musk's personal and professional life had been dragged through the mud. Every decision, every move, every ounce of his character had been scrutinized. And while he had weathered the storm, it hadn't been without a cost. He felt the weight of his responsibility more than ever. The fine was a reminder that no one, not even someone with his power, could escape the consequences of their actions. But it wasn't just about the fine, it was about the deeper, intangible cost of this trial. The damage to his reputation, the cracks it had revealed in his own belief system. It had shaken him in ways he wasn't quite ready to admit. His team had gathered around him as they always did after a big moment, meeting in a small conference room just off the courthouse. They were celebrating, congratulating him on the outcome, but Musk wasn't feeling particularly celebratory. He listened to their words, their praise, but part of him was distant, lost in his own thoughts. The trial had made him question not just the people around him, but himself. It was a humbling experience. And though he'd come out on top, he couldn't help but wonder, had he done enough? Had he truly learned the lessons that life had tried to teach him? Gwen, his right-hand woman and longtime confidant, noticed the shift in his demeanor. She'd worked alongside him for years, and she knew when he was in deep thought, lost in his own head. She gave him a quick look, then pulled him aside after the meeting wrapped up. "Hey, you okay?" she asked quietly, her voice betraying a rare concern. Musk turned to her, meeting her gaze. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." Gwen raised an eyebrow. "Thinking about what?" He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Everything, I guess. The trial, the way things have gone the last few years. I've always been so focused on the future, on what's next, that I never really stopped to think about how I've gotten here. I've been so busy building, so focused on changing the world, that I forgot about the people around me, about myself." Gwen gave him a knowing smile. "You've never been one for reflection. You're always forward-focused. But maybe, just maybe, this is your chance to look back and assess. You've got the world at your feet. The question is, how do you want to move forward from here?" Musk didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared out the window, his mind spinning. He thought about SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, his endless list of ventures. They were all revolutionary, pushing humanity toward a better future. But was that enough? Had he sacrificed too much of himself in the process? The trial had exposed vulnerabilities he hadn't expected, and the weight of it all was settling in now, in the aftermath. "I've spent my whole life building companies, changing industries, but maybe, just maybe, I need to focus on something else now," he said quietly, more to himself than to Gwen. "Maybe I need to learn how to build a better life outside of business. To rebuild relationships, to focus on what really matters." Gwen placed a hand on his shoulder, a rare moment of solidarity in a world where Musk was used to being the one people leaned on. "You've always been more than just the guy who builds companies. You're a visionary, Elon. But you're also a person. A human being. And even visionaries need to take care of themselves, too." He looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. In that moment, he realized something important. It wasn't just the trial or the verdict that had left a lasting impact on him. It was the understanding that, perhaps, the most important part of his journey wasn't about pushing the boundaries of technology or reaching new heights in space. It was about reconnecting with the humanity he had almost lost in the pursuit of greatness. "I need to take a step back," he admitted, feeling the weight of the words as they left his mouth. "Not from the mission, but from the constant battle. I need to find balance." Gwen nodded, smiling in a way that Musk hadn't seen in years, genuine, warm, and filled with understanding. "That sounds like a good plan." As they left the courthouse and got into the black SUV waiting outside, Musk's mind was still racing. The world had always demanded so much from him. His work, his vision, it had consumed him. But now, for the first time, he felt like he was looking at things from a new perspective. The trial, for all its harshness, had given him the clarity he needed. It wasn't just about triumphing over adversity anymore. It was about healing, about taking the lessons of the past and using them to move forward in a healthier, more balanced way. It wasn't an easy decision to make, and he knew it wouldn't be simple. But he had to start somewhere. Perhaps it was time for a different kind of challenge. One that wasn't about making history, but about learning how to live in the moment and appreciate the relationships he'd neglected. As the car sped away from the courthouse, heading toward his next meeting, Musk closed his eyes for a moment and let the weight of the day settle into his bones. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just another chapter, one that would teach him, push him, and help him become more than just the visionary everyone knew him to be. It was time to start living not just for the future, but for the now. And with that, Elon Musk was ready for whatever came next. The days following the trial were a blur. Elon Musk found himself taking more time than usual for reflection, perhaps a little too much. For the first time in a long time, the demands of the world outside seemed to slow down, almost as if the world was allowing him to take a breath. His mind was still processing the verdict, but even more, it was processing something deeper, the realization that there was more to life than the relentless pursuit of the next big thing. Musk had always been a man driven by ambition. His dreams had been too big to ignore, too important to delay. But now, he felt a pull in a different direction, a quieter one. The hustle and grind of work, once an all-consuming force, no longer felt like the only path. He still had his projects, SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, but they didn't feel as urgent as they once did. Something had shifted within him. He spent his mornings walking through the halls of SpaceX, but instead of making quick decisions or brainstorming with his engineers, he found himself sitting quietly in the observation room, watching the rockets on the launch pad. He marveled at the beauty of it all, the raw power, the human ingenuity that had made these machines possible. But it wasn't the thrill of conquering space that held his attention anymore. It was the quietness of the moment, the peace that came with just being present. Musk had been so obsessed with conquering new frontiers that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to simply exist in the now. One afternoon, after a long string of meetings, Musk found himself at a small cafe in Los Angeles. It was a stark contrast to the high-tech labs and sleek offices he was used to. The cafe was cozy, with a low hum of conversation and the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the air. He sat at a corner table by the window, nursing a latte as the world outside carried on without him. He could hear the laughter of children playing outside, the chatter of passers-by, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Musk wasn't thinking about the next billion-dollar idea. He wasn't thinking about Mars or electric cars. He was just present. It was a small moment, but one that would prove pivotal. He realized that in his quest to change the world, he had neglected the simpler joys of life, the quiet moments, the personal connections, the beauty of the mundane. For years, he had surrounded himself with a team of brilliant minds, yet he had failed to truly connect with them beyond the business. Now, with a new perspective, he felt the desire to rebuild those relationships, not just as a boss, but as a human being. He picked up his phone and texted Gwen, asking her to meet him later that day. When she arrived, she found him seated at the same cafe, his gaze soft and contemplative, something she rarely saw in him. "Hey, what's going on?" Gwen asked as she sat down across from him, looking concerned. "I think I've been running too fast," Musk replied, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been focused on the future, on changing the world, but I think I lost sight of the present. I need to recalibrate. And I want to start by reconnecting with the people who've helped me get here." Gwen raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by his candor. "That's a big shift. What's going to change?" Musk leaned back in his chair, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "I'm not abandoning my projects. I still want to push the boundaries of technology, but I need to find a way to balance that with my personal life. I want to spend more time with my family, with the people who matter. I want to learn how to be a better friend, a better leader, not just a boss." Gwen smiled, clearly pleased by what she was hearing. "That's a pretty big admission, Elon. I don't think anyone expected you to slow down, let alone prioritize anything other than your next big project." "Neither did I," Musk admitted, his eyes locking with hers. "But I've realized that to truly change the world, I need to start with myself. If I'm not whole, if I'm not balanced, how can I expect to lead others? How can I expect my team to follow if I'm not leading by example?" Gwen nodded thoughtfully. It's a tough realization to come to, but it sounds like you've got the right mindset. Taking care of yourself will only make you stronger in the long run. Musk smiled, feeling a small sense of peace in his decision. It was a shift he knew wouldn't be easy, but it was one he had to make. The mission hadn't changed, it had simply evolved. He was still the same person who wanted to revolutionize the world, to make life multiplanetary, to solve energy problems. But now, he understood that to truly fulfill those goals, he needed to live a fuller, more balanced life. I think I'm going to take some time off, Musk said, surprising Gwen with the words. Not forever, but I'm going to step back from some of my responsibilities. I want to get to know the people around me better, I want to be a better father. I've been so busy looking at the stars that I've missed the beauty of the ground beneath my feet. Gwen blinked in disbelief. You. Taking time off. You. Elon Musk. He chuckled softly. Yeah, I know. It's a big step. But I think it's what I need right now. They talked for a while longer, discussing everything from Musk's plans for the future to his desire to reconnect with his children and friends. For the first time in years, he wasn't just thinking about the next mission, the next milestone. He was thinking about himself, and how he could truly make a difference in the lives of those around him, not just the world. As they finished their coffee and prepared to leave, Musk felt a sense of quiet resolve. The future was still important, but for the first time, he felt ready to embrace the present, to live in the moment. In the weeks that followed, Musk did just that. He spent time with his family, took long walks with his children, and even started getting involved in local community projects. He still worked on his companies, of course, but with a new perspective. He delegated more responsibilities, trusted his teams more, and found joy in the smaller moments of life. Musk's shift in priorities didn't go unnoticed by the people around him. His team noticed a change in his demeanor, he was more present, more accessible, and more human. They were inspired by his decision to slow down, to prioritize self-care and relationships. Musk had always been an enigma, a driven, relentless force of nature. But now, he was something different, a leader who had finally learned the importance of balance. And though his work continued, the impact of his decision to slow down was profound. It was as if, in taking a step back, Musk had found a new sense of purpose, one that wasn't just about the world at large, but about the people in his life, and about himself. It was a quiet Saturday morning when Elon Musk woke up and realized that his life, at least for the moment, was more peaceful than it had ever been. The phone wasn't ringing off the hook, the media wasn't hounding him for a statement, and his email inbox was mercifully calm. For the first time in a long time, he was alone in his thoughts, and it felt good. He sat up in bed and looked out of the window. The California sun filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow on the room. He wasn't in a hurry to check his messages or jump into another project. Instead, he found himself reflecting on something that had always been a secondary concern for him, his family. For years, Musk's focus had been laser-sharp on his companies, his mission to change the world. His personal life had taken a back seat. He had always been a distant figure in his children's lives, caught up in the relentless pursuit of progress. He had missed out on birthdays, family dinners, and simple moments that many fathers take for granted. But now, with the trial behind him and his decision to take a step back from work, he realized that it was time to change that. Musk's thoughts shifted to his children. His eldest son, Nevada, whom he had lost so early in life, his twin sons, Griffin and Xavier, and his youngest, XAE-A12, who was just beginning to form his own personality. He had been present for some of their lives, but never as much as he wanted. There was so much more he could give them. He reached for his phone, fingers hesitating over the screen as he debated what to do next. His relationship with his ex-wife, Tallulah Riley, had been complicated. They had separated once, reconciled, and then separated again. Their relationship had been a mix of love, conflict, and mutual respect, but it had never truly been what either of them needed. He still cared for her, but he knew deep down that he needed to focus on building a better relationship with his children now, more than ever. He tapped out a message to his ex-wife, "Hey Tallulah, I know we haven't talked much lately, but I've been thinking a lot about how I can be a better dad to the kids. I want to be more involved. Can we talk?" He sent the message before he could second-guess himself. Minutes later, the reply came in. "Of course. Let's talk soon. They'd love to see you more." He smiled to himself, feeling a warmth spread through him. The seeds of a new beginning were being planted. And though there was still much to navigate with his past relationships, he felt ready to embrace the challenge of rebuilding them, piece by piece. Later that day, Musk drove to his children's home. He hadn't been there in months, not since he had been caught up in a whirlwind of work and personal turmoil. His mind raced as he neared the house, unsure of how they would respond. Would they see him as the father they remembered, or would they see him as the man who had been absent for too long? When he stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door, his heart was pounding. He knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet afternoon air. The door swung open, and there stood Griffin and Xavier, grinning from ear to ear. "Dad!" Griffin exclaimed, rushing forward to give him a hug. Xavier followed close behind, also embracing him. The simple act of their warmth and familiarity brought tears to Musk's eyes. It felt like nothing had changed, and yet everything had. He had missed so much. But right now, in this moment, he wasn't going to dwell on that. Instead, he focused on the present, on the chance to be with them now. "I've missed you guys," Musk said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I haven't been around as much as I should have. I want to change that." They smiled up at him, unbothered by the past. "It's okay, Dad," Xavier said, his voice soft. "You're here now." Musk knelt down to their level, looking them both in the eye. "I'm going to be here more. I want to be there for you, all the time. I'm going to make it up to you." Griffin gave him a skeptical look. "You say that now, but you always get busy again." Musk nodded, acknowledging the truth in his son's words. "I know I've let you down before, but this time will be different. I'm going to work harder at being a better father. I promise." The next few hours were filled with laughter and catching up. Musk joined them for an impromptu game of basketball in the backyard, something he would have never considered a few months ago. The simplicity of the moment was jarring. Here he was, the world's richest man, playing a game of hoops with his children, and yet it was one of the most fulfilling moments of his life. No launches, no deadlines, just pure, unadulterated connection. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the yard, Musk found himself sitting on the porch with his kids, talking about everything and nothing at all. For the first time in a long time, he felt grounded. He didn't need to be planning the next billion-dollar project. He didn't need to be racing against the clock to achieve some grand vision. Right here, right now, was enough. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Musk found himself sitting alone in his car outside the house, just thinking. It was an odd feeling, being so still. The chaotic energy he was used to had quieted, and in its place, there was peace. As he sat there, he texted Gwen, "It's strange, but I think I'm finally figuring out what matters most. It's not the future of humanity I've been focused on all this time, it's the people I care about. I've missed so much. But I'm going to do better. I have to." Gwen's response was simple but reassuring, "You've got this, Elon. It's a long road, but you're on the right path." With that, he put his phone down and took a deep breath. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Musk felt a sense of hope. This was a new chapter, not just for his work, but for his life. The journey to rebuild wasn't going to be easy. It would take time, effort, and patience. But he was ready. And for once, he knew that the journey he was on was worth every step. As the weeks passed, Elon Musk's newfound commitment to reconnecting with his family and embracing balance began to ripple out into other areas of his life. The quiet moments with his children, the deep conversations with his ex-wife Tallulah, and the time he spent reflecting on his past decisions had all contributed to a profound shift in his mindset. He was no longer the relentless innovator who could only see the next frontier. He had become a man who valued the human connections around him, who realized that his purpose wasn't just in technology, but in the lives he touched. At work, this transformation began to show in subtle yet impactful ways. Musk had always been known for his quick, sometimes cutting, decision-making. His leadership style was marked by urgency, efficiency, and an almost single-minded pursuit of his goals. But now, he found himself stepping back more often, listening more carefully to those around him, and encouraging his teams to collaborate rather than just follow his directives. He was beginning to value the perspectives of others, not just for the benefit of his companies, but for the sake of building a culture of trust and mutual respect. This shift in his leadership was felt immediately at SpaceX. Musk called a series of meetings with his senior leadership team, and instead of dictating his vision as he had in the past, he opened the floor for discussions. He encouraged his engineers and managers to share their ideas and concerns, and for the first time in years, he truly listened without rushing to implement solutions. "I know we've always moved fast, but I think we need to start moving smarter," Musk said in one of these meetings. "We have the talent here to do something great, but I need all of us to be more in sync. I can't do this alone, and I don't want to. We have to build something bigger than just one person's vision." The room went silent for a moment, the team members exchanging surprised glances. Musk had always been the figurehead, the visionary, and to hear him speak with such humility was a revelation. They had always respected him, but now they saw a new side of their leader, one that was more approachable, more human. Kathy, one of SpaceX's senior engineers, finally broke the silence. "I think what we need is more space to experiment, Elon. More room to take risks, to fail, and then learn from those failures. That's how we'll grow as a company." Musk nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. We've been so focused on the next milestone that we've lost sight of the importance of the process. Let's create a culture where innovation is the result of experimentation, not just the desire to hit numbers. Failures are just lessons. They're part of the path forward." From that day on, SpaceX felt different. There was a new energy in the air, a sense of openness, collaboration, and even a little bit of fun. The engineers were no longer afraid to propose bold ideas. They felt encouraged to think outside the box, to challenge Musk's ideas and to push the envelope. And Musk, in turn, found himself listening more than ever before, appreciating the creativity and brilliance of his team. This shift in leadership wasn't confined to SpaceX. At Tesla, a similar transformation began to unfold. Musk spent more time with his engineers and product designers, focusing on how to create a better working environment. Instead of being the sole driving force behind every innovation, he began to trust his teams to take the reins on certain projects, stepping back and letting them lead. One afternoon, Musk sat down with J.B. Straubel, Tesla's former CTO and co-founder, who had since transitioned into an advisory role at the company. They sat in Musk's office, reminiscing about the early days of Tesla. "Remember when we were just a small team in that cramped little office?" Musk asked, his voice soft with nostalgia. Straubel chuckled. "How could I forget? Those were some of the most intense years of my life. But look at us now. We've come so far." "We have," Musk agreed. "But I think we need to do more. We need to get back to that sense of urgency we had in the beginning, but without losing sight of what's important. People. The people who are working day in and day out to make this vision come to life." Straubel nodded. "You're right. We've gotten bigger, but sometimes it feels like we've lost that edge. We need to inject some of that old fire back into the company, while also remembering the human side of what we do." Musk leaned back in his chair, reflecting on Straubel's words. For so long, he had been chasing the next big thing, the next revolution in energy, in transportation, in space exploration. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten what had originally driven him, the people. His team, his family, his friends, and even the customers who believed in his ideas. They were the ones who made it all possible. It's time to change how we think about success, Musk said after a long pause. We've defined it in terms of numbers, profits, milestones, market share. But real success is about creating something lasting, something that makes the world better. We need to make sure that we're not just changing technology, but changing lives. As he spoke those words, he knew that they weren't just about business. They were about life itself, the kind of life he wanted to live, the kind of impact he wanted to leave. It wasn't about being the biggest or the fastest, it was about being the most meaningful, the most thoughtful, and the most human. In the following weeks, this mindset began to permeate all aspects of Musk's life. He found himself spending more time with friends, rekindling old relationships he had neglected in favor of work. He began reaching out to former colleagues, even those with whom he had lost touch over the years. One evening, he had dinner with Steve Jobs' former protege, Jonathan Ive, and they reminisced about the days when they both dreamed of creating the future. The conversation was easy, filled with mutual respect and admiration, and it reminded Musk that no matter how far he had come, the journey was never truly about reaching the destination, it was about the people he met along the way. Musk's friends and family began to notice the change in him. He was more present, more patient, and more open. He made time for the small things, like dinner with his kids, or taking a walk with his mother. For the first time in years, he wasn't consumed by the next big project. Instead, he was living in the moment, and for him, that was a revelation. The impact of his transformation was clear, the companies he led were more cohesive, his personal relationships were stronger, and his sense of purpose had deepened. Musk had finally found balance, not just between work and life, but within himself. And as he looked to the future, he knew that he was ready to face whatever came next, not as a man consumed by ambition, but as a leader who understood that true success was about making a meaningful impact, one person at a time. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It was supposed to be just another day at SpaceX. The team had gathered for their weekly status meeting, and Musk was prepared to hear updates on several major projects. The Mars mission was progressing, and the new Falcon 9 launch had been successful. Tesla's Gigafactory in Berlin was still on track. Everything seemed to be moving smoothly, but Musk couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break. He had been feeling the pressure, an almost palpable weight that had been creeping up on him ever since he decided to embrace a more balanced approach. For years, he had been used to working around the clock, pushing himself and everyone around him to get things done. Now, he was trying to lead with patience and perspective. But this new mindset wasn't without its challenges. Musk was used to immediate results, to solving problems quickly. Waiting for change, for things to settle, felt unnatural. As the meeting began, Musk listened intently to the updates, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about the latest Tesla rollout, a high-profile project that was running behind schedule. The press was starting to catch wind of the delays, and Musk knew that once the media caught hold of a story, it could spiral out of control. They would twist it into something catastrophic, turning a mere delay into a failure. He could feel the anxiety building, even though he was determined not to let it show. Then, it happened. "Elon, we're running into issues with the new powertrain for the Model Y," said Michael, one of Tesla's senior engineers. "It's nothing major, but it's going to push us back a few weeks. We're working on it, but it might take a bit longer than expected." Musk's pulse quickened, and his thoughts raced. A few weeks? That was nothing in the grand scheme of things, but to the outside world, it would be a huge setback. The Tesla brand was under the microscope, and any delay, no matter how small, would fuel the narrative that Musk was losing control of his empire. He could already imagine the headlines: Tesla struggles, Musk's vision in doubt. He took a deep breath, trying to center himself. This was the moment where his newfound patience would be put to the test. But the old habits were hard to shake. His initial instinct was to dive in, take control, and demand answers, but he resisted. He reminded himself that change, growth, and success weren't achieved overnight. It was time to let his team do what they were best at. Musk wasn't the one who needed to be on the factory floor fixing problems anymore. He had to trust that they could handle it. "I understand," Musk said, his voice calm but firm. "But we need to find a way to mitigate this delay as much as possible. Keep me updated, and let's make sure the rest of the team is aligned. Let's figure out how to work smarter here, not harder." There was a moment of silence. The room was used to Musk's intense approach, and this shift in his demeanor was something new. They could all feel it, the change in him. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't indecision. It was leadership, but a different kind of leadership. The kind that recognized that sometimes, the best course of action was to let go and trust the process. Michael nodded. "Understood, Elon. We'll keep working on it and get it back on track." After the meeting, Musk sat alone in his office. The urge to micromanage was still there, gnawing at him, but he fought it. He knew that he needed to remain focused on the bigger picture, not get lost in the weeds. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his messages, mostly work-related, but a few from friends and family. He paused when he saw one from Gwen. "How are you doing? You've been quiet lately." He stared at the message for a long moment, wondering if he should open up to her. He had been keeping his struggles to himself, trying not to burden anyone with the weight of his own internal conflict. But Gwen had been there for him through it all, and he knew that she would understand. He quickly typed back, "It's been tough. Trying to figure out how to balance everything. I'm learning, but it's not easy. This shift in how I lead feels like a test. One that I don't always pass." He waited for her reply, and when it came, it was simple but reassuring. "You're doing better than you think. Change takes time. You've got this, Elon." That was all he needed. She didn't offer any grand solutions or tell him to snap out of it. She just reminded him that progress was messy, and that was okay. That night, after work, Musk sat down with his children for dinner. It had become a ritual he didn't want to break, this quiet time where he could step away from the chaos of work and just be a dad. He had started to enjoy these moments more than anything else. They were his anchor, the only thing in his life that truly felt normal and unshakable. "So, how was your day, Dad?" Xavier asked, his voice filled with the curiosity only a child could have. "It was a little stressful," Musk admitted, setting his fork down. "But I'm learning that it's okay to let go sometimes, and just trust the people around you." Griffin raised an eyebrow. "Is that hard for you?" Musk smiled at his son's insight. "Yeah, it is. But I'm trying to get better at it." "I think you're doing good," Griffin said, his mouth full of mashed potatoes. "You seem more relaxed." Musk laughed. "Well, I'm glad it's showing. I still have a lot to work on, though." "Dad, are you going to keep going to those meetings with SpaceX and Tesla?" Xavier asked. Musk nodded. "I am. But I'm going to make sure I don't miss out on moments like this. No more work all the time. Family comes first." Griffin grinned. "Good. We like having you around." The simple words hit Musk harder than he expected. He had spent so many years neglecting these moments in favor of his work, but now that he was making the effort to be present, it was clear that his children appreciated it. The next few days were a blur of meetings and project updates, but Musk kept his commitment to balance. He didn't let the pressure overwhelm him. Every time he felt that familiar urge to dive in and take over, he reminded himself of the lesson he had learned that day: trust. Trust in his team, trust in the process, and trust in himself to make the right choices. But it wasn't just about trusting his team. It was about trusting that the universe would align in its own time. Success wasn't a sprint, it was a marathon, one where moments of discomfort and frustration would be followed by periods of growth and reward. In the end, he knew that true leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being present, being patient, and being willing to grow along with the people who believed in you. The calm that Elon Musk had tried so hard to embrace was shattered one fateful afternoon when he received an urgent call from Tesla's global supply chain director. The situation was critical. There was a major production halt due to a severe shortage of key materials needed for their next batch of electric vehicles. The problem was more complicated than just supply chain issues. It was a systemic failure, one that had been building up for months and only now reared its ugly head. For a moment, Musk felt like the weight of his entire company was bearing down on him again. His mind raced, and old instincts took over. He could already imagine the media's reaction, the backlash from investors, and the disruption this would cause across the company. Tesla had come so far. To let something like this take down the momentum was unthinkable. His first impulse was to take control, to step into the situation and solve it immediately. But then, almost instinctively, he paused. The transformation he'd undergone in recent months was still a work in progress, and here, on the precipice of crisis, he was faced with a choice: revert to his old, command and control style or lean into his new approach of patience, trust, and delegation. "Let me get a full breakdown," Musk said calmly, despite the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. "I want to know exactly what's happening. Then we'll find a solution." The director hesitated. "Elon, the supply chain is a mess. We're talking months of backlog deliveries from some of our suppliers. If we don't address this, the delays could push us back into next year." Musk took a breath, feeling the familiar rush of anxiety creep up on him. This wasn't just a delay, this was a potential catastrophe. He imagined the fallout, the stories that would paint Tesla as a company on the verge of failure. A company that couldn't meet the demand it had created. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of diving straight into crisis mode, Musk found himself reflecting on the lessons he had learned in the past weeks. His mind, once obsessed with constant action and solutions, began to consider the broader picture. Was this really a crisis? Or was this just another challenge that needed time, creativity, and collaboration to resolve? "I understand," Musk said, his voice steady. "We need to address the root cause of this. Let's call a meeting with the supply chain team and the engineering department. I want everyone to share their insights. I'm not looking for quick fixes, I'm looking for solutions that will keep us moving forward in the long term." As he hung up the phone, Musk walked to the window of his office, gazing out at the sprawling Tesla factory. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the landscape. For a moment, everything felt surreal. He had been so consumed by his work in the past that he rarely stopped to appreciate the fruits of his labor, the massive plant that employed thousands of people, the cars on the assembly line that were changing the future of transportation. But now, as he stood there, he realized something important. This moment was a reminder that the path forward was never a straight line. It was filled with obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. What mattered wasn't avoiding those moments, but how one responded to them. In the meeting that followed, Musk did something that surprised even himself. He stepped back. For the first time in years, he allowed the team to take the lead. He had always prided himself on being the one who provided the vision, the direction. But today, he was a listener. As the team discussed the supply chain crisis, Musk absorbed the information, asking questions but never rushing to give answers. His engineers, supply chain managers, and even his CFO all contributed ideas. The discussions were heated at times, but Musk didn't intervene. He let the team debate. They disagreed, they proposed new strategies, and they argued their points, but they did it with mutual respect, and gradually, a solution began to take shape. By the end of the meeting, Musk was no longer the sole problem solver. The team had crafted a plan, one that involved more sustainable partnerships with new suppliers, tighter quality control measures, and a redefined production schedule. It wasn't going to be easy, and there were no guarantees. But for the first time in a long while, Musk felt a sense of optimism. As the meeting wrapped up, Musk felt a profound sense of relief. The problem wasn't solved in a day, but he had witnessed something extraordinary, the power of collaboration. It wasn't just about having the right people, it was about trusting those people, empowering them to lead, and being willing to let go of control when the time was right. The next few days were a blur of work, phone calls, and follow-ups. Musk had to check in on the progress of the plan, but he found himself less anxious than he had been in the past. He wasn't just managing crises anymore, he was leading the company through challenges, guiding it in a way that involved more than just rapid decision-making. It was about steady progress, trust, and giving his teams the room they needed to excel. But as the supply chain issues started to stabilize, another issue crept up, one that had been quietly simmering beneath the surface for some time. Musk's personal life was once again taking a hit. The demands of his work, the long hours, and the constant pressure were starting to strain his relationships. He hadn't been able to balance everything as well as he had hoped. The time he had promised his children, the promises he had made to his friends, and even his own mental health were beginning to suffer. There were days when he felt like he was walking a tightrope, always one step away from losing his balance. One evening, after a particularly grueling week, he received a text from Gwen. "Are you okay?" It was simple, but it cut through the noise of his day. For a moment, he just stared at the message. How could he explain the emotional weight he was carrying? How could he admit that, despite everything he had accomplished, he still felt like he was drowning? He picked up the phone and called her. "Hey," he said, trying to sound casual but failing. I'm struggling. More than I want to admit." Gwen's voice was soft, understanding. "I thought you were doing better. What's going on?" "I'm trying to be patient with everything, work, the kids, myself, but it's hard," Musk confessed. "I feel like I'm constantly running, trying to juggle everything, and it's just not enough." "You can't do it all, Elon," Gwen replied. "You don't have to. You've made so many changes. But you need to give yourself permission to rest, to breathe. You've been carrying a lot on your shoulders." Musk leaned back in his chair, the weight of her words sinking in. He had been so focused on leading, on solving problems, that he had forgotten to take care of himself. It wasn't enough to change his approach at work, he had to change how he treated himself. "I know," Musk said quietly. "But it's hard to let go. I've always had to be the one who fixes everything. It's who I am." Gwen's voice softened. "You don't have to fix everything, Elon. You just need to live. Let yourself do that. Let go of the need to be perfect." The words hung in the air, a simple truth that Musk had spent years avoiding. Maybe it was time to stop trying to be the perfect leader, the perfect father, the perfect partner, and just be human. Elon Musk sat in his office late into the night, the city lights of Palo Alto stretching out before him like an infinite grid. The office was silent, save for the soft hum of his computer and the occasional sound of papers shuffling as he reviewed reports. His thoughts were scattered, his mind cycling through 1,000 different problems and challenges. He had just finished a video call with the SpaceX team, where they discussed a potential setback in the Starship development timeline. Nothing major, but enough to delay their ambitious goals of reaching Mars by the mid-2020s. That kind of delay wasn't just inconvenient, it was catastrophic. Musk couldn't shake the feeling of unease gnawing at him. He was facing the kind of crossroads in his career and personal life that most people could only imagine. He had built multiple revolutionary companies, changed the game in industries like electric cars and space travel, and yet, now, he found himself questioning if it was all worth it. The personal sacrifices had been many, and his relationships, especially with his family, had taken a toll. The weight of leading not just one, but several billion-dollar enterprises, was becoming more apparent as time went on. Musk had always prided himself on his ability to overcome obstacles, but these recent moments of reflection were making him feel like he was at a breaking point. The phone buzzed on his desk, and he glanced down to see a text from his brother. "Kimball, are you okay? You've been pretty quiet lately. Let's talk." Elon had been avoiding calls and messages for weeks, too wrapped up in his work to really check in with anyone. He had been trying so hard to balance his life, to take the steps to be more patient, but the pressure, both from within and from the world around him, felt overwhelming. He quickly typed a reply, "Yeah, just a lot on my plate. Let's talk tomorrow." Then, a thought struck him. He had been focusing so much on the external, on managing his companies, maintaining his image, and keeping the world's expectations in check, that he had completely neglected his internal world. His own emotions. His mental health. Musk had long been known for his tireless work ethic, the kind of drive that seemed impossible for most people to comprehend. But even the strongest engines needed fuel, and right now, he was running on empty. The next morning, Musk woke up earlier than usual, something that had become a habit since his shift in mindset. It was one of the only ways he could carve out a moment of peace before the storm of meetings and calls began. He looked out at the sunrise, the golden light casting a soft glow over the Bay Area. For a fleeting second, he felt a sense of clarity, an understanding that perhaps, just maybe, he was on the right path. Not everything had to be solved right now. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be human. That morning, Kimball called, his voice familiar and comforting. "Hey, Elon. How are you doing, really?" Musk hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. He had always been the strong one, the one who kept his emotions in check, never letting anyone see him sweat. But now, the cracks were beginning to show. He could hear the concern in his brother's voice, and for once, he allowed himself to acknowledge the weight he was carrying. "I'm struggling, Kimball," Musk admitted, his voice sounding more vulnerable than he expected. "I've been trying to change, trying to lead differently, but it's hard. I feel like I'm constantly juggling too many things, and it's starting to catch up with me." Kimball was quiet for a moment, probably processing what his brother had just shared. Finally, he spoke, his tone gentle but firm. "Elon, I know you're used to doing everything yourself, but you don't have to. You've built an empire, but you don't have to do it all alone. You've got people around you who believe in you. You can lean on them." Musk leaned back in his chair, the weight of his brother's words sinking in. Lean on people. It was something he had never really allowed himself to do. He had always been the visionary, the problem solver, the one everyone turned to. The idea of needing others, of asking for help, it felt almost foreign. "I guess I've always felt like I had to be everything to everyone," Musk said quietly. "But maybe I'm realizing that I don't have to carry it all." There was a pause on the other end, then Kimball spoke again. "Exactly. You're only human, Elon. You don't have to do it all on your own." The conversation with Kimball was a turning point. For the first time in a long time, Musk felt like he had permission to admit that he couldn't do everything by himself. He had always prided himself on being self-sufficient, on overcoming obstacles through sheer willpower. But now, with the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him, he realized that true strength came from vulnerability, allowing himself to lean on others, to be open about his struggles, and to embrace the imperfections in his journey. That afternoon, as Musk sat in yet another meeting discussing the progress of the Mars mission, he found himself reflecting on the conversation he had just had. He looked around the room, at the faces of the engineers and scientists who had gathered to discuss the mission's timeline, and something shifted within him. He wasn't the only one carrying the weight of the future of humanity's exploration. They all were. And together, they would find a way to overcome whatever challenges came their way. After the meeting, Musk took a moment to himself, walking out onto the balcony of his office. He stood there, looking out at the sprawling Tesla and SpaceX campuses. The sight should have filled him with the usual sense of pride, but today, it also gave him a sense of perspective. He wasn't just building companies. He was building a future that was bigger than any one person, no matter how driven they were. As he stood there, a thought crossed his mind: what if he didn't have to be the savior? What if he could still be a leader, but one who trusted others to step up, too? What if the key to success wasn't about shouldering all the weight, but about sharing it? It was a revelation, one that would shape the next chapter of his life. The road to Mars, to a sustainable future, to changing the world, it wasn't a solo mission. It was a collective effort. And he, Elon Musk, was not the only one with a vision for the future. He had a team. He had a family. He had people who believed in him, and more importantly, people he could rely on. And as he looked out over the horizon, he felt a sense of hope that he hadn't felt in a long time. The future wasn't as daunting as it had once seemed. In fact, it was filled with infinite possibilities, all waiting for him to step forward, not alone, but with the people who shared his dream. The following days were filled with subtle shifts in Elon Musk's approach to both his personal and professional life. It wasn't that he had completely abandoned his old ways, those habits, his relentless work ethic, his obsession with perfection, and his drive for constant innovation, remained deeply ingrained in his nature. But now, he found himself incorporating moments of reflection, patience, and trust into his routine. It was as if he had finally realized that success was not just about solving problems at breakneck speed, but about fostering a sustainable, long-term vision that involved everyone around him. The ripple effects of this internal transformation started to show in his meetings. He was more present, more engaged, and, perhaps most surprisingly, less inclined to dominate every conversation. Instead of taking the lead immediately, he let his engineers, managers, and even his executive team share their thoughts first. He asked questions, listened intently, and offered his insights only when necessary. The culture of his companies began to change as well, subtly at first, but steadily. His leadership style was evolving into something less transactional and more collaborative. But as much as Musk was experiencing a shift in his approach, the reality of his responsibilities remained ever present. SpaceX, Tesla, and Neuralink were all moving forward with relentless momentum, and the stakes had never been higher. There were milestones to be met, deadlines to be adhered to, and investors to keep satisfied. The challenge now was not just how to lead these companies to success but how to do so while maintaining his own mental and emotional health. It was a Friday afternoon when Musk found himself seated in a conference room with his core team at SpaceX. They were discussing the upcoming launch of Starship, a massive rocket that would be central to Musk's dream of colonizing Mars. The room was filled with excitement, but there was a palpable sense of pressure, too. The timeline had already slipped, and there were concerns about meeting their next set of deadlines. Elon, one of the senior engineers, Sarah, began, "We've made significant progress, but there's a lot we still need to work through before the next launch window. There's a risk we might have to delay the mission again." Musk nodded, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. He wasn't one to shy away from setbacks, but the pressure was mounting. He could feel the weight of the project's potential failure creeping up on him, and it made him nervous. The people in this room, his team, were depending on him, and if he failed to meet their expectations, it would feel like a personal defeat. "Sarah, I understand the risks," Musk replied, his voice calm but resolute. "We need to do everything we can to get it right, but I don't want us to rush into something just to meet a deadline. This mission is bigger than any one launch. It's about the future of humanity. We need to get it right, even if it means taking more time." He could see the surprise on the faces around the table. It wasn't like him to give up so easily on a deadline. In fact, he had always been the one pushing his teams to work faster, harder, and with more intensity. But now, something had shifted. He was willing to sacrifice speed for precision, he was willing to be patient, even in the face of the immense pressure that came with the project. "We'll keep pushing forward," Musk continued, "but let's make sure we're not compromising the integrity of the mission just to get a launch off the ground. Our goal is Mars, and we can't afford to cut corners." The team nodded in agreement, and Musk could feel a collective sense of relief fill the room. They weren't just in this to meet a deadline, they were in it to make history. As the meeting wrapped up, Musk found himself thinking back to his conversation with Kimball. Perhaps the most significant change in his life wasn't just the way he approached his companies, it was the way he was beginning to approach life itself. He had been so driven by results and success that he had neglected the importance of the journey. Success wasn't just about achieving goals, it was about how one moved through the world, how one handled the setbacks, and how one learned from the failures. Later that night, as he sat in his office, scrolling through emails, Musk received a call from Gwynne Shotwell, the president and COO of SpaceX. Her voice was urgent, but there was a level of calm in her tone that immediately put him at ease. "Elon, we've got an update on the Starship launch," Gwynne began. "We're still on track to meet the revised timeline, but there's something I think you should know. The engineers have come up with a new approach for the engine design. It's a game changer, but it's going to take some time to fully implement." Musk was silent for a moment. He had always trusted Gwynne's judgment, and if she was confident in the new approach, he knew it had potential. But this would mean more delays, and that was a conversation he wasn't eager to have with the press or his investors. "How much time?" Musk asked, his mind already calculating the impact on their goals. "Probably a few months," Gwynne replied. "But I believe this could make the difference between a successful Mars mission and a failed one." Musk rubbed his forehead, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He thought of the stakes, the billions of dollars in investment, the media scrutiny, the pressure to deliver. But more than that, he thought of the long-term vision. He had always preached about making life multiplanetary, about reaching Mars, about humanity's future. If this was the key to that future, then it was worth the wait. "I trust your judgment, Gwynne," Musk said, his voice steady. "Let's go with it. We'll communicate the delay, but we'll also focus on the bigger picture. We're not just launching a rocket, we're launching humanity's future. And we can't afford to do that halfway." As he hung up the phone, Musk allowed himself a moment of relief. He had made the decision. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the right choice. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was truly embracing the concept of long-term thinking. He wasn't rushing to meet arbitrary deadlines, he was taking the time to ensure that what they were building was worth the effort. In the weeks that followed, Musk continued to shift his focus inward. He found himself spending more time with his children, something he had sorely neglected over the past few years. He wasn't just a CEO or an inventor, he was a father, a person, and someone who had to take care of his own well-being. He started to make time for things that mattered outside of work, hikes in the mountains, dinners with friends, and quiet moments spent reflecting on the progress he had made, not just in business, but in life. Musk had long been obsessed with the future, but now, he realized, the future could wait. It was time to enjoy the present and to embrace the journey, not just the destination. As he sat in his office one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Musk felt a sense of peace. He had taken a step back from the constant drive, the relentless pursuit of success. Instead, he was now focused on creating something more meaningful, a legacy built not just on groundbreaking achievements, but on the values of patience, collaboration, and understanding that were shaping the way he led. He smiled, the tension easing from his shoulders. Maybe, just maybe, this was what true success looked like. As the weeks passed, Elon Musk's internal transformation began to manifest in more than just his interactions with his teams. Word had gotten out about the delays at SpaceX, and with the media eager to cover any setback, the pressure started to build again. The stories were coming in waves, some critical, others filled with speculation, and a few even questioning Musk's ability to lead SpaceX into the future. He had always been used to the media frenzy, but this time, something felt different. It wasn't just about the company or the projects anymore. It was about his reputation, the public's perception of him. Musk had always been a polarizing figure, praised by his fans for his ambition and vision, and often vilified by critics for his unorthodox approach and brash personality. But the stakes felt higher now. His leadership was being questioned, and he had to decide how to handle it. One particularly biting headline in the New York Times read, "Musk's vision may be crumbling, can he still lead SpaceX to Mars?" The article was filled with doubt, quoting unnamed sources close to Musk's companies who questioned whether his constant pursuit of perfection was leading his teams into burnout. The piece suggested that SpaceX's ambitious goals were too lofty and that perhaps Musk's own ego was getting in the way of success. It was the kind of article that could derail investor confidence and shake public faith in SpaceX. Musk knew that he could let this criticism slide off his back, as he had done countless times before. But this was different. He couldn't afford to let the narrative take hold that he wasn't capable of leading his companies through adversity. The story wasn't just about him, it was about the future of human space exploration. He called an emergency meeting with his inner circle, the senior leaders at both SpaceX and Tesla. Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president and COO, was the first to speak up as they all sat around a long conference table, the room dimly lit by the California sun filtering through the blinds. "Elon," she began, "I know the media's been tough lately, but we can't let this distract us. We've faced worse before. What matters is the long-term vision. We've been down this road before. Remember when they said we couldn't land rockets, and now look at us. We've proven the doubters wrong time and time again. We will do it again." Musk nodded, but the weight of the article still hung heavy on his mind. He had always preferred to be in the background, letting his work speak for itself. But the truth was, in this media-driven age, silence could sometimes be more damaging than speaking out. "I agree with you, Gwynne," Musk said, his voice steady but filled with a hint of frustration. "We've done the impossible before, but this time, it feels like the scrutiny is more intense. It's not just about SpaceX anymore, it's about how the world sees me. The way they write about me affects the work we do. It's hard not to let it get to me." A brief silence filled the room. Everyone knew how much Musk cared about his companies, and about his image, whether he admitted it or not. "We can't let this be a distraction," Gwynne continued. "But I think it might be time for a more direct approach. The public wants answers, Elon. Maybe it's time for you to take control of the narrative." Musk leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the surface of the table. The idea of going public with a response wasn't one he had entertained before. But Gwynne was right, if they didn't respond, the narrative would continue to spiral. It was time to take a stand. "I'll do it," Musk said decisively. "I'll give an interview. But not just any interview. I'm going to address everything, straight to the point. I won't let them paint this as a failure. We're still moving forward, and I'll make sure the world knows it." The plan was set in motion quickly. Within days, Musk had secured an interview with 60 Minutes, a rare and high-profile appearance for a CEO who typically avoided the spotlight. The interview would be held at Tesla's Gigafactory in Nevada, a fitting backdrop for a conversation about space exploration, electric cars, and the future of humanity. Musk had always been reluctant to put himself in the spotlight, but this time, he had no choice. The future of his companies, and the credibility of his long-term vision, depended on it. As the day of the interview approached, Musk found himself feeling a mix of nerves and resolve. He had faced challenges before, but this was different. This wasn't just about technology or innovation, it was about his personal philosophy. How would he come across? Would he be able to articulate his vision clearly? Most importantly, would the public respond to his authenticity, or would they continue to see him as a reckless dreamer chasing impossible goals? When the camera lights finally flicked on, Musk sat across from the interviewer, a seasoned journalist who had covered some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley. The questions started out predictably, probing into the delays at SpaceX and the risks of his ambitious timeline for Mars. Musk answered each question with calm precision, but his frustration with the media's portrayal of him began to surface. "I understand that the media has to sell stories," Musk said, leaning forward slightly. "But there's a difference between journalism and sensationalism. We've had setbacks, sure. But every step forward, every failure, and every success is a part of the journey. I've always said that it's not about getting it right the first time. It's about trying, learning, and adjusting as we go." He paused, his gaze steady as he continued. "I've never been afraid of failure. In fact, I welcome it. Because each failure brings us closer to success. And we're still on track to make history. I'm not going to let a few articles define the future of humanity's exploration of space. We're going to Mars, and nothing is going to stop us. The interview continued, but the tone had shifted. There was a noticeable shift in Musk's demeanor. He was no longer the self-doubting figure from a few weeks ago. He was confident, resolute, and unafraid to stand up for his vision. His words were clear, direct, and full of conviction. He wasn't just defending his company, he was defending his life's work. By the end of the interview, Musk felt a sense of relief. The pressure hadn't dissipated entirely, but he had taken control of the narrative. It was clear that the media would still find ways to challenge him, but at least he had set the record straight. The next day, the headlines were more balanced. Some were still critical, but many acknowledged Musk's unwavering dedication to his vision. As he walked out of the studio, Musk felt a sense of accomplishment. He had faced the media storm head-on, and while the journey was far from over, he had taken an important step toward controlling his narrative. It wasn't just about defending his work, it was about showing the world who he really was, a visionary who was willing to embrace failure, learn from it, and keep pushing forward. The days following Elon Musk's media interview were a whirlwind. The immediate aftermath was a mix of praise and criticism. Many of his supporters hailed his candidness and his unwavering commitment to the Mars mission. They admired his boldness in addressing the delays and reaffirming his long-term vision. On the other hand, detractors, particularly those from the financial community, took a more skeptical view, questioning whether Musk's idealism would be enough to steer his companies through turbulent times. But Musk had learned a valuable lesson in the past few weeks: his vision could no longer be driven solely by external validation or constant praise. His goals were too ambitious, and the journey too complex, for him to rely on the approval of others. This was something deeper, something far more personal. The path ahead would always be fraught with challenges, setbacks, and doubt, but what mattered most was his resilience and ability to navigate through them. And so, as he sat in his office at SpaceX, staring out at the vast expanse of the Californian sky, Musk found a rare moment of clarity. He had spent years being consumed by the pressure to succeed, to build a legacy that would shape the future of humanity. But now, in the silence of the moment, he realized that success wasn't defined by the world's approval or even by the completion of his most ambitious projects. Success, for him, was about the journey itself, the process of creating, learning, and evolving. He had always been a man of action, constantly moving forward, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But now, he recognized the importance of taking a step back. The pressure to constantly perform, to be the one who changed the world single-handedly, had taken its toll. It was time to refocus, to find balance in the midst of his chaotic, high-stakes career. This realization didn't come easily, but it was liberating. Musk understood that he wasn't just the CEO of SpaceX or Tesla, he was a human being, and part of being human was learning how to weather the storms of life, both professionally and personally. And while he wasn't one to wallow in failure or self-pity, he knew that in order to truly lead his companies to greatness, he first needed to lead himself. He took a deep breath and stood up from his desk, stretching his arms above his head. The weight on his shoulders didn't seem quite as heavy anymore. It was almost as if, by accepting the unpredictable nature of his journey, he had freed himself from the pressure that had once defined him. Just then, his phone buzzed, pulling him back to reality. It was a message from Kimball, his brother. Musk had come to appreciate Kimball's straightforward, no-nonsense approach to life. While Elon often found himself lost in the complexities of his various enterprises, Kimball was the one who kept him grounded, reminding him of the simple joys that existed beyond the boardroom. "Hey, big bro," the text read. "Are you up for dinner tonight? We need to talk about something important." Elon smiled. Kimball had a way of cutting through the noise, helping him see what truly mattered. He quickly typed a response. "Sounds good. Let's meet at 7. That evening, Musk drove to the restaurant where he and Kimball often met. It was a small, unassuming place, nothing extravagant, just a quiet corner of a cozy dining spot in Los Angeles. When he arrived, Kimball was already seated at their usual table, looking relaxed, as always. "Hey, bro," Kimball greeted, standing up and giving Elon a hug. "How's it going?" Elon sat down, taking a moment to glance around the restaurant before meeting his brother's gaze. The last few weeks had been a blur, interviews, meetings, press conferences, but tonight, he felt a sense of calm that had been eluding him for a while. "I'm doing all right," Elon said, settling into the chair. "It's been a crazy few days. But I think I'm finally starting to figure out what's really important." Kimball nodded, as if he had known all along that his brother was on the verge of something significant. "I think that's why I wanted to meet tonight," Kimball said. "You've been running at full speed for so long, Elon. Maybe it's time to slow down a bit and focus on what matters most. The businesses, the vision, I'm all in on that. But you've got to take care of yourself, too." Elon listened intently, appreciating the way Kimball spoke to him, not as a mentor or a critic, but as someone who understood the full picture. His brother wasn't just concerned about his business empire, he cared about Elon as a person. "I've been thinking about that a lot," Musk admitted. "I've spent so much time building these companies, chasing this dream of Mars, that I've forgotten to take care of myself. I'm constantly looking ahead, but I need to remember to be present." Kimball smiled. "I know, man. We both know how easy it is to get caught up in the grind. But you're right. The whole point of this journey is to make life better, not just for the world, but for you too." Elon felt a sense of warmth spread through him. Kimball's words resonated deeply. There was truth in them, truth that had been easy to overlook amidst the chaos of the past few years. "So, what's your advice?" Elon asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Kimball leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. "Take some time for yourself. Spend time with your kids. Get back to doing things that make you happy. Don't just focus on the work. If you don't take care of yourself, how can you lead others effectively?" Elon thought about it for a moment. It wasn't an easy pill to swallow. Musk had always believed that success required sacrifice, that relentless pursuit was the key to achieving greatness. But Kimball's words had struck a chord, reminding him that a life well lived wasn't just about building empires, it was about building relationships, nurturing health, and taking joy in the simple moments. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, and the brothers laughed over old stories. But the weight of Kimball's advice lingered in Elon's mind. The next morning, he made a decision. He would begin to prioritize his well-being, not as a mere afterthought, but as an essential part of his strategy for success. That night, Elon Musk left the restaurant with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The pressures, the doubts, the criticisms, they would always be there. But for the first time in a long while, he understood that resilience wasn't just about weathering the storm. It was about finding balance, about learning to step back and enjoy the ride. The decision to prioritize his well-being was one of the most important changes Elon Musk had made in recent years. It wasn't a total abandonment of his relentless drive for success, but rather a recalibration, an acknowledgement that his path forward had to be guided by a balance between the personal and the professional. He had realized that in order to lead his companies effectively, he needed to be more than just a visionary entrepreneur. He had to be a leader who understood the value of time, rest, and genuine connections with others. As Musk began to focus more on his personal life, he also recognized a subtle yet significant shift in his approach to innovation. The constant pressure of deadlines, media criticism, and external expectations had clouded his judgment. He had been so fixated on delivering the future, on reaching Mars, on achieving the next big breakthrough, that he had neglected to nurture the core spirit of innovation that had originally driven him, the joy of discovery, the excitement of solving problems that no one had dared to tackle before. One day, as he walked through SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, Musk had an epiphany. He'd been walking the halls of the design team's area when his eyes caught sight of an old, unfinished prototype, one that had been pushed aside in the midst of the company's rapid expansion. It was a small, yet powerful reminder of a time when the team had focused purely on creating something revolutionary for the sake of it. The prototype was a reworked version of the Raptor engine, designed for the future Mars missions. While the team had moved on to larger, more advanced projects, this small engine represented a time when SpaceX was still learning how to push boundaries, unencumbered by the immense pressure of meeting governmental contracts or delivering on the promises made to investors. Musk stared at the prototype for several moments, his thoughts racing. What had once been a bold, exploratory design had now become an afterthought. Why? He had pushed for innovation at the expense of creative freedom. His team had been forced to follow a rigid timeline, chasing profitability and performance numbers rather than taking risks and exploring new ideas. This wasn't how he had started. This wasn't the vision he had for SpaceX, Tesla, or any of his ventures. He wanted to be the person who led the world into the unknown, who championed curiosity above all else. It was time to return to that mindset. The next day, Musk called a meeting with his SpaceX engineering team. It was a bold move, considering that many were still reeling from the aftermath of recent setbacks. But Musk was clear, this meeting was different. He wasn't there to talk about the timeline for the Mars mission or the cost-benefit analysis of the Starship program. He wanted to talk about something deeper. "I've been thinking a lot," Musk began, his voice calm but resolute. "We've been so focused on the future and what we need to deliver that we've lost sight of the true heart of innovation. What's the point of reaching Mars if we lose the spirit of discovery that got us here in the first place?" There was a silence in the room as his engineers exchanged uncertain glances. Musk wasn't one to admit mistakes or show vulnerability, but this time, his honesty was palpable. The realization that he had overemphasized deadlines and practicality had humbled him. "We need to embrace risk again. We need to go back to the drawing board, experiment, and fail. I want to see us build prototypes that are purely for the sake of pushing the limits, not because they'll make money or meet some investor demand, but because they're pushing us to think differently." It was a new direction, one that would require a shift in mindset across the entire organization. But Musk was determined. He wasn't just talking about engineering. He was talking about the very culture of SpaceX. He wanted to recapture that raw energy, the feeling of being at the frontier of technology, unafraid of failure. The response was more positive than he expected. While some were wary, others found the shift refreshing. The room buzzed with a renewed energy, the kind that had been missing for months. The idea of innovation without the looming pressure of commercial success was inspiring. Musk could see it in their eyes, the team was ready to take risks again. One of the senior engineers, a longtime member of the SpaceX family, spoke up. "Elon, I think you're right. We've gotten so focused on the big picture that we've lost sight of the small victories. We need to experiment more, let our curiosity drive us." Musk smiled, feeling the spark of excitement return to the room. It was the kind of energy he had missed, the kind that made him fall in love with building rockets in the first place. The first step in this new direction was to revive several stalled projects that had been abandoned due to time constraints. Musk asked his team to focus on revisiting and rethinking old prototypes, whether they were engines, materials, or design concepts. The goal wasn't to meet a deadline, but to rediscover the thrill of creating something that hadn't been done before. One project that immediately caught Musk's attention was a next-generation, reusable rocket booster that SpaceX had put on hold 2 years earlier. The technology behind it was still ahead of its time, but with the right adjustments and an open-minded approach, the team could potentially create something revolutionary. Musk also encouraged the team to look beyond rockets. He wanted them to explore new ideas in propulsion systems, energy storage, and even the use of artificial intelligence in space missions. The possibilities seemed endless, and Musk couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement as he thought about the future. As the weeks went by, SpaceX's culture began to shift. The engineers were no longer working under the crushing pressure of deadlines, they were working to explore, to experiment, and to break new ground. Musk had created an environment where failure was not feared but embraced as a necessary part of progress. Innovation wasn't just about meeting expectations, it was about exceeding them, and doing so in ways that had never been imagined before. For the first time in years, Musk felt a renewed sense of optimism. The world had always viewed him as someone who achieved the impossible, but he now realized that true success came from staying true to his roots, embracing the unknown and daring to fail, because failure was simply a stepping stone to something greater. The shift at SpaceX was just the beginning. Musk's decision to refocus the company on the joy of innovation had far-reaching effects, not only within the walls of SpaceX but across his entire empire. The lesson he learned, about balancing the relentless drive for success with the need to embrace failure as a natural part of the creative process, changed the way he approached his other ventures as well. At Tesla, the pressure to meet ever-increasing production demands had been creating an unsustainable work environment. The race to produce more electric vehicles, at a faster rate, with higher quality, had pushed the team to its limits. Elon realized that, in the drive to meet deadlines and increase profits, Tesla had inadvertently lost some of the spark that had once made it a leader in the electric vehicle revolution. Innovation had become secondary to scaling operations, and that was something he needed to change. In a series of meetings with Tesla's top engineers and executives, Musk brought up the idea of recalibrating the company's approach. He was adamant about maintaining the company's commitment to sustainability, but he also recognized that Tesla's identity, its ability to push the boundaries of what was possible, was at risk. The team was so focused on meeting quarterly production targets that they had stopped thinking about the bigger picture, the long-term impact Tesla could have on the world. "I know we've been under a lot of pressure to deliver," Musk said during one of the meetings, his voice steady but resolute. "But we can't afford to lose sight of why we started this company in the first place. Tesla is about transforming the way the world uses energy. It's about solving the climate crisis, and it's about leading the world into a sustainable future. We can't lose sight of that mission." The room was quiet as the team absorbed his words. They had heard Musk's passionate speeches before, but this time, there was a sense of urgency that hadn't been there in a while. The world was changing fast, and the future of energy and transportation was at a critical crossroads. Tesla could either lead the charge into the next phase of innovation, or it could fall behind. "We've done incredible things," Musk continued, "but we need to do more. We need to push even further. I want us to be the catalyst for the next generation of electric vehicles. We're not just making cars, we're making the future. And I need everyone here to remember that." Musk's words resonated deeply with the team. Many of them had joined Tesla because they believed in the company's mission, to reduce humanity's dependence on fossil fuels and create a sustainable future. But in recent years, the company's relentless focus on production numbers had overshadowed that vision. Now, Musk was urging them to return to their roots, to embrace the boldness and audacity that had made Tesla a disruptor in the first place. Over the next several months, Tesla's engineers began to work on groundbreaking new technologies with renewed energy and passion. They explored ways to improve battery efficiency, make electric cars more affordable, and introduce new models that would push the limits of design and performance. The focus was no longer on simply scaling production, but on creating vehicles that would set a new standard for what electric cars could be. Musk also made the decision to double down on Tesla's commitment to renewable energy. The SolarCity acquisition, which had always been a part of his vision for a sustainable energy ecosystem, was revitalized. Tesla would not just be making electric vehicles, it would be creating the entire infrastructure needed to power the world with clean energy. With the renewed focus on energy solutions, Tesla launched a new initiative to expand its solar and battery storage products for homes and businesses. The goal was to provide affordable, accessible, and sustainable energy solutions to a global market. The team worked tirelessly to improve the solar roof technology and the Powerwall, two products that could help individuals and businesses generate and store their own energy, reducing their reliance on traditional energy grids. But Musk's personal transformation was just as important as the company's. He began to prioritize his health and well-being in ways that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Gone were the long nights of endless emails and back-to-back meetings. Instead, Musk made a point of spending more time with his family, enjoying moments of quiet reflection, and even taking up hobbies that brought him joy, like reading, painting, and gardening. It was a deliberate shift, one that allowed him to recharge and come back to his work with a clearer mind and a renewed sense of purpose. By the end of the year, the changes within SpaceX and Tesla were undeniable. SpaceX had launched new prototypes and designs that pushed the boundaries of space exploration, and Tesla was on track to release several new models that would make electric cars even more accessible to the masses. But more importantly, Musk felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The pressure he had once felt to deliver on others' expectations had lessened. He was now leading his companies with a renewed sense of purpose, not because he had to meet deadlines, but because he genuinely believed in the impact his work could have on the world. One evening, as Musk sat in his office at SpaceX, looking out at the stars, he allowed himself to think about the future. The journey to Mars, the promise of sustainable energy, the exploration of the unknown, they were all within his grasp. But more than that, he now understood that his legacy wasn't just about the technology he would leave behind. It was about how he had evolved as a leader, how he had learned to navigate the storms of life with resilience and humility. As he sat there, he made a mental note. The road ahead would still be filled with challenges, there would always be critics, setbacks, and obstacles. But Musk was no longer afraid of them. He had learned that it was the journey, not just the destination, that defined success. In that moment, for the first time in a long while, Musk smiled. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of possibilities. He had the power to shape it, not just through his companies, but through his own transformation. As Musk's journey of transformation continued, it didn't take long for the critics to reappear. There was no shortage of doubters who believed that the changes Musk was making, both in his personal life and in his companies, were signs of weakness or instability. His decision to slow down and refocus on innovation, rather than obsessively chasing deadlines, was met with skepticism in some circles. Critics, both within the industry and the media, were quick to question Musk's vision. The Wall Street Journal published an article claiming that Musk's shift in focus was a signal of faltering ambition. The headline read, "Is Elon Musk losing his edge? New priorities may be a sign of weakness." The piece implied that Musk's growing emphasis on his personal life, along with his call for greater creativity and innovation over expedient production, could threaten his ability to maintain the cutting-edge, competitive advantage that SpaceX and Tesla had worked so hard to build. The media circus that followed was a familiar one. Musk had faced the brunt of public criticism before, and he knew how much impact these narratives could have. But this time, it felt different. The criticism didn't just come from pundits, it came from people who had once supported his mission. A former Tesla executive, now a vocal critic, was quoted in another article. "Elon's decisions have always been erratic, but now it's clear that his mental state is starting to affect his businesses. Innovation should be about execution, not abstract ideas." His focus on recalibration might be the death knell for his companies. Musk didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a step back to reflect. The nature of the criticism was telling, it wasn't focused on the technology itself, but on Musk's personal choices and how they might impact the companies. It wasn't about whether the future of Mars colonization or the development of electric cars was a worthy cause. It was about whether Musk, as the individual leading those efforts, was still the man capable of pulling it off. But Musk knew one thing for sure, he could not afford to be distracted by these voices. They were part of the noise. The only opinion that truly mattered was his own, and he had made his decision. He would not be swayed by critics who believed that progress could only be measured by speed and profit. His companies would move forward at their own pace, with a focus on what truly mattered, building something that would change the world. As SpaceX launched its next series of tests for the Starship program, the skepticism grew louder. The launch window was fast approaching, and the pressure to deliver was mounting. The engineering teams had taken Musk's guidance to heart and were pushing the boundaries of what was technologically possible. Yet, with each new step, the questions loomed larger: could they truly pull it off? Would the delays caused by their renewed focus on innovation make them fall behind the competition? The first test flight of Starship after the recalibration was a critical moment. It was no longer just about achieving success for SpaceX, it was about proving to the world that Musk's vision was still alive and well. This time, the pressure felt heavier than ever. At the launch pad, the SpaceX team was on edge. They had been working tirelessly for months, rethinking everything from the engines to the flight systems, implementing Musk's back-to-basics approach. It had all come down to this moment, the culmination of weeks of exploration and hard work. As the countdown began, Musk stood quietly in the control room, watching the engineers work with meticulous precision. His mind wasn't on the criticism, nor on the media's portrayal of his recent changes. Instead, he focused entirely on the moment, trusting that his team was ready. The countdown hit 0, and the Starship soared into the sky, its engines roaring with power. For a moment, everything seemed perfect, the flight was smooth, the trajectory was accurate, and the spacecraft appeared to be functioning exactly as planned. The crowd watching from the observation area cheered, and Musk allowed himself a brief, quiet smile. But as the Starship reached its peak altitude and began its descent, things started to go wrong. The engines failed to ignite at the right moment. There was a brief pause in the communications between the launch pad and the spacecraft. And in that moment, Musk's heart sank. The spacecraft plummeted to the ground, erupting in a fiery explosion as it hit the surface. The room fell silent, save for the frantic noise of the engineers scrambling to make sense of what had happened. The launch was a failure. A failure that would dominate the headlines for days to come. Musk was immediately flooded with messages of concern from both his team and the media. The media, of course, had a field day, declaring the failure to be a clear sign that SpaceX was no longer on the cutting edge. Social media was flooded with mocking memes, people speculating about Musk's mental state, and the pressure to deliver was once again palpable. Musk walked outside, into the cool night air. He stood there for several moments, taking in the sight of the wreckage. It was a devastating blow, but not an unexpected one. He had seen failures before, so many of them. But this time, there was something different about it. He wasn't devastated in the way he had been in the past. He wasn't consumed by self-doubt or frustration. Instead, he felt something else, determination. The failure didn't signal the end of SpaceX or Tesla. It was simply another lesson, another step forward. The road to Mars, the path to revolutionizing energy, was filled with setbacks, but Musk knew that every failure brought them closer to the goal. "We'll try again," he said quietly to himself. "We always do." The next day, Musk called a meeting with his team. The first words out of his mouth were simple: "We learn from this. We figure out what went wrong. And then we move forward." It was the kind of leadership that SpaceX had been built on. Musk's ability to embrace failure, to learn from it, and to inspire his team to push forward no matter the obstacle, had always been what made him a true innovator. And this time, it would be no different. The critics could say what they wanted, but Musk knew that his companies weren't just about the results. They were about the journey. And as long as they stayed focused on that, there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. The days following the failed Starship test flight were filled with a mix of intense scrutiny and quiet reflection. While the media continued to paint the failure as proof that Musk had lost his edge, the people who truly knew him, his engineers, his closest colleagues, understood something the world didn't: this wasn't the end. It was simply another bump in a much longer road, a road that was never meant to be smooth. As the headlines raged on, Musk retreated into his work, determined to understand what went wrong and, more importantly, to fix it. He spent sleepless nights at SpaceX, reviewing every piece of data from the flight, dissecting every detail of the mission, trying to uncover the flaw that had led to the catastrophic failure. He wasn't just interested in fixing the problem for the next test flight, he wanted to understand it on a deeper level, to learn something fundamental that could guide the future of the program. What went wrong? Musk asked during one of the early meetings with his top engineers. He didn't want answers that were vague or full of excuses. He wanted to dig into the truth, even if it was uncomfortable. There was a failure in the engine ignition sequence, one of the engineers explained. It happened when the engines tried to ignite during the descent phase. The timing was off, and the fuel didn't combust properly. Musk nodded, absorbing the information. He wasn't surprised. This was the kind of problem that could happen when pushing the limits of what was technically possible. But he was also determined to ensure that it didn't happen again. The engines are the heart of this vehicle, Musk said, his voice calm but resolute. We fix this. We get it right. Let's find out why this happened and build a solution. This is not the time for second-guessing. We keep moving forward. Despite the failure, Musk's resolve only hardened. He understood the risks of pioneering space exploration, but the rewards were far greater than the potential for failure. Mars still beckoned, and SpaceX was still the only company with a real chance at making that vision a reality. There was no room for doubt or hesitation, only for relentless determination. In the weeks that followed, the SpaceX team worked tirelessly to address the ignition issue. They re-examined their designs, conducted new simulations, and overhauled the flight profile. The testing process became more rigorous than ever before, with each new iteration of Starship undergoing intense scrutiny. Musk, meanwhile, was focused on maintaining the morale of his team. He knew that the failure had taken a toll on them. The long hours, the sleepless nights, and the emotional weight of the setback were wearing on everyone. But Musk had learned that leadership wasn't just about technical expertise. It was about inspiring people, keeping them focused on the bigger picture, and helping them see the light at the end of the tunnel. He would often visit the engineers during their late-night shifts, offering encouragement and reminding them of the significance of their work. Every failure is a step closer to success, he would say. If we aren't failing, we aren't pushing hard enough. Slowly, the atmosphere at SpaceX began to change. The engineers, once disheartened by the crash, found new energy in Musk's unshakable confidence. They were no longer simply trying to fix a problem, they were working toward something greater. They were working toward the future of space exploration, and they knew that Musk's vision was the only one that could make it happen. Meanwhile, at Tesla, things were beginning to shift as well. With Musk's renewed focus on sustainability, the company was ramping up efforts to develop new technologies for energy storage and renewable power generation. The development of the Tesla Cybertruck had taken a back seat during the recalibration phase, but now it was back on track, and the team was pouring their creative energy into making it the most revolutionary electric truck the world had ever seen. Musk was thrilled by the progress Tesla was making in energy solutions. The solar products were gaining traction in new markets, and the Powerwall and Powerpack systems were helping businesses and homeowners become more energy independent. The company was no longer just building electric cars, it was laying the foundation for a global, sustainable energy infrastructure. But as SpaceX and Tesla moved forward, Musk faced increasing pressure from those around him to get back on track with timelines and profits. The investors, the board members, the shareholders, they all wanted to see results. The longer the delays continued at SpaceX, the more their patience wore thin. At Tesla, the high demand for new models only grew, and the team was under constant scrutiny to meet production targets. Musk knew this was part of the deal. In order to push for real change, to make a lasting impact on the world, he had to deal with these pressures. But he also understood something crucial, he wasn't in this for short-term wins. He was playing the long game, and his companies needed to focus on innovation, not just numbers. I'm not interested in playing it safe, Musk said during a meeting with Tesla's board. I'm here to change the world, and that means taking risks. Yes, there will be failures along the way, but if we keep pushing, we'll get there. We have to build for the future, not just for the next quarter. The board members were skeptical, but Musk's conviction was unshakable. We're in this for the long haul. We're not here just to make money. We're here to make history. By the end of the year, the first successful launch of Starship after the redesign was scheduled. The failure that had rocked SpaceX was now a distant memory, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Musk's confidence was infectious, and the SpaceX team was more determined than ever to succeed. When the day of the test arrived, the Starship prototype was ready. The ignition system had been completely overhauled, and all the systems were functioning optimally. The countdown began, and the engines roared to life, sending the spacecraft into the sky. This time, there were no issues. The flight was flawless, and the entire team erupted into cheers when the spacecraft safely returned to Earth. Musk stood on the launch pad, watching the Starship descend. His heart raced as the vehicle touched down softly, the sound of its landing legs absorbing the impact. This was a victory, one that felt sweeter because it had come after so much struggle. "Success," Musk said simply, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. It was a victory, but Musk knew that the journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more failures, and more successes to come. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of triumph. They had done it. And with that, the road to Mars, and the future of humanity, was just a little bit closer. The success of Starship's return to flight was more than just a victory for Musk and SpaceX, it was a watershed moment for the entire aerospace industry. The significance of the test flight reached far beyond the confines of the SpaceX headquarters or even the media buzz surrounding it. It marked a turning point, one that would shape the trajectory of not only space exploration but the broader technological and energy sectors as well. Other aerospace companies, once proud of their dominance in the space industry, watched with growing unease as SpaceX's triumphs signaled the dawn of a new era. The success didn't just prove that Musk and his team could bounce back from failure, it showed the world that they were capable of redefining what was possible in space travel. In the days following the flight, reports flooded in from all corners of the globe. Governments, private companies, and even space agencies such as NASA began to reassess their own plans for future missions. The sheer scale and ambition of SpaceX's vision were impossible to ignore. Starship wasn't just a spacecraft, it was a symbol of what the future could look like if the right combination of vision, innovation, and risk-taking aligned. As Musk sat in his office, going over the flood of messages and news articles, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility that came with this success. It wasn't just about sending rockets into space, it was about changing the course of human history. The dream of colonizing Mars, of creating a multiplanetary species, was closer than ever. And with that progress came even more obstacles and challenges. The ripple effect from SpaceX's success wasn't limited to aerospace, though. As news of the breakthrough spread, other industries began to take notice. The energy sector, long a target for Musk's ambitions, started to feel the urgency of his vision. With Tesla leading the charge in renewable energy and electric vehicles, and SpaceX paving the way for interplanetary exploration, it was clear that the future was shaping up to be far more sustainable, and far more reliant on new technologies, than anyone had predicted. Musk's involvement in renewable energy had always been rooted in his belief that humanity needed to transition to sustainable energy in order to survive, and that vision was now a central focus for Tesla. Musk knew that the future of space exploration wasn't just about getting to Mars, it was about ensuring that life on Earth could sustain the population long enough to reach the stars. At Tesla, the focus had shifted toward making energy storage systems more affordable and accessible. The launch of new energy products like the Tesla Solar Roof, combined with continued efforts in battery production and the Powerwall, signaled Musk's deepening commitment to global sustainability. As SpaceX's rockets climbed to new heights, so too did the stakes for the companies Musk led. There was no turning back now. His efforts to revolutionize the automotive, energy, and aerospace industries were becoming inextricably linked, as each breakthrough in one field spurred further advancements in the others. But even as Musk continued to push boundaries, the road ahead was not without its challenges. The corporate world, with all its traditional power structures, had started to fight back against Musk's relentless pursuit of innovation. Old guard executives, some of whom had been critical of Musk's methods in the past, saw his success as a direct threat to their own established empires. For them, Musk was a disruptor, a visionary whose impatience with conventional wisdom was a threat to the status quo. One such opponent was Richard Barlow, CEO of a long-established competitor in the aerospace industry. Barlow had been watching SpaceX's rise with increasing frustration, and his disdain for Musk's unconventional approach was no secret. Barlow had built his company with traditional strategies: slow, methodical progress, plenty of caution, and above all, a focus on maintaining control. To him, Musk was a maverick, a man willing to take risks that most couldn't afford, and whose success was as much about luck as it was about vision. Barlow began to make his discontent known publicly. He called Musk's approach reckless and irresponsible in a series of interviews, claiming that SpaceX's success was due to nothing more than fortunate circumstances. Real success comes with a steady hand and a reliable strategy, not gambling with billions of dollars on the hope of getting to Mars, Barlow said in one particularly scathing interview. The comments made headlines. Musk, true to his form, didn't take the insults lying down. He responded in his typical blunt fashion, posting a tweet that simply read, "You can't innovate if you're afraid of making mistakes. #risk-taker #Mars or bust." The tweet quickly went viral, drawing both praise and criticism from the public. But Musk wasn't done yet. In the days following the tweet, he invited Barlow to a public debate on the future of space exploration. Musk knew that Barlow's traditional approach, while respected by some, was a relic of the past. The future of space, Musk believed, wasn't going to be dictated by the cautious, conservative thinking that had dominated the industry for decades. It would be shaped by bold thinkers, by those willing to take risks and to fail, only to rise again stronger. The invitation to debate was an unexpected move, but it was one that Musk knew would resonate. It wasn't just about taking on Barlow, it was about making a statement to the entire aerospace industry. SpaceX wasn't just competing with other companies, it was competing with outdated ideas, with the old guard that had held the reins for too long. The debate, when it finally took place, was nothing short of a spectacle. The two CEOs sat across from each other on stage, with Musk in his trademark black t-shirt and Barlow in a tailored suit. The audience was rapt, eagerly waiting to see how this clash of ideologies would unfold. Barlow began with his usual rhetoric about caution, about taking the time to perfect technology and avoid the kind of reckless risks Musk was known for. He talked about the importance of adhering to established principles in aerospace, about the safety of slow, methodical progress. Musk, on the other hand, didn't mince words. He talked about the need to take bold actions, to push the boundaries of what was possible, and to embrace failure as a stepping stone to success. He argued that the old ways of thinking had gotten humanity nowhere. If we wanted to reach Mars and beyond, we had to be willing to leap into the unknown, to take risks that others were too afraid to take. The debate raged on, but by the end, it was clear that Musk had won the audience over. His vision for the future, his willingness to take risks, and his unshakable confidence had struck a chord with those who were tired of the same old corporate talk. Barlow's cautious approach seemed outdated, while Musk's boldness felt like a breath of fresh air. As the debate concluded, the media buzzed with excitement. Musk had once again proven that he was a force to be reckoned with in the world of innovation, and his critics had been forced to take a back seat. The ripple effect from SpaceX's success and Musk's public showdown with Barlow spread across industries, and Musk's reputation as a visionary continued to grow. And as Musk left the stage, he knew that the future, his future, was just beginning. There would be more obstacles, more skeptics, and more setbacks, but as always, he was ready to face them head-on. The dream of Mars was within reach, and the world was watching. The future Musk had envisioned for humanity was now closer than ever. With Starship safely returning to orbit and SpaceX continuing its relentless march toward Mars, the world had begun to embrace a new reality, one where the impossible was not only possible but inevitable. Musk had once been considered a dreamer, a man with an audacious vision that was often seen as too big, too risky. But now, after years of setbacks and triumphs, those same dreams were transforming the world in ways no one could have predicted. In the years that followed the successful test flight of Starship, SpaceX achieved milestone after milestone. The first private mission to the moon was launched, and for the first time in history, humans were once again set to walk on the lunar surface, this time with private industry leading the charge. As SpaceX continued its development of the Starship program, the idea of making humanity a multiplanetary species seemed more tangible than ever. The successes in space were paralleled by the developments on Earth. Tesla had become the largest electric vehicle manufacturer in the world, with its cars, trucks, and energy solutions powering millions of homes and businesses. The Cybertruck, which had once seemed like a crazy, futuristic idea, was now a symbol of innovation, capturing the imagination of consumers worldwide. Tesla's solar roofs had revolutionized how energy was consumed, with communities in every corner of the globe starting to embrace solar power as the future of energy. While Musk's achievements were monumental, what really set him apart was his ability to turn seemingly impossible challenges into opportunities for growth. He had a knack for seeing the bigger picture, for understanding how the industries he was involved in, automotive, energy, and aerospace, were interconnected. Each success in one field fed into the others, creating a powerful, self-sustaining ecosystem that would one day allow humanity to live on Mars and beyond. The news surrounding SpaceX's accomplishments had become a daily staple in the media. People from all walks of life were inspired by Musk's unyielding drive, and many saw him as the modern-day equivalent of the explorers and inventors who had changed the world centuries before. He had become a symbol of what was possible when you refused to give up on your vision, no matter how unattainable it seemed. But Musk's success was not without its sacrifices. In the early days of SpaceX and Tesla, he had spent countless sleepless nights in factories and at launch sites, pushing his teams to the brink of exhaustion. He had faced incredible pressure from investors, shareholders, and critics alike, who questioned whether his goals were even remotely realistic. Yet through it all, Musk had persevered. His relentless pursuit of progress had often come at the cost of personal relationships, as he had put work above all else. His marriages, strained by the demands of his career, had been tumultuous, and there were times when it seemed as though Musk's personal life would collapse under the weight of his professional ambitions. But despite the personal sacrifices, Musk remained unwavering in his commitment to his vision. Now, as he stood at the helm of the most powerful companies in the world, he looked back at the path he had taken with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The dream of Mars, once considered a flight of fancy, was now an attainable goal. Humanity was closer to becoming a multiplanetary species than ever before, and SpaceX was at the forefront of that revolution. But for Musk, the journey was far from over. His vision extended beyond Mars, beyond even the stars. He had set his sights on building a self-sustaining city on Mars, where humans could not only survive but thrive. He wanted to create a backup for humanity, a place where people could live, work, and explore in a way that had never been possible before. He didn't just want to visit Mars, he wanted to build a new world. In the coming years, SpaceX launched the first human mission to Mars. The media frenzy surrounding the event was unlike anything the world had ever seen. For the first time in history, human beings were leaving Earth for another planet, and Musk was the man who had made it possible. The launch was a triumph not only for SpaceX but for humanity as a whole. It was the realization of Musk's dream, one that had seemed so impossible just a decade before. As the first astronauts set foot on the surface of Mars, Musk watched from Earth, his heart swelling with pride. He had done it. SpaceX had succeeded where others had failed, and humanity was now poised to take its first steps toward becoming a multiplanetary species. He had faced countless obstacles along the way, but none had been insurmountable. Through his persistence, determination, and unwavering belief in the future, Musk had turned science fiction into reality. Despite the monumental achievement, Musk remained grounded. "This is just the beginning," he said in his address to the public after the mission. "We've proven that it's possible to reach Mars, but now we need to build a sustainable presence there. We need to learn how to live, work, and thrive on Mars. The next step is to make sure humanity can survive there, for good." For Musk, the journey to Mars was only one chapter in a much larger story. He believed that the future of humanity didn't just lie in space exploration, it lay in how humans could innovate and adapt to the challenges of the world around them. Whether it was sustainable energy, artificial intelligence, or space exploration, Musk saw his mission as far broader than any single company or technology. It was about the future of humanity, and how, through innovation and perseverance, people could rise above their limitations and unlock new possibilities for future generations. Musk's legacy wasn't just about the technology he had created, it was about the culture of innovation and progress he had fostered. His companies, Tesla, SpaceX, and others, had become hubs of creativity and forward thinking, attracting the brightest minds from all over the world. People weren't just working for a paycheck, they were working toward a vision that was bigger than themselves. They were part of something that could change the world, and they knew it. As Musk continued to push the boundaries of what was possible, one thing became clear: his vision would never be confined to the past. He wasn't just a man who dreamed of Mars, he was a man who dreamed of a future where humanity could overcome any obstacle and achieve the impossible. And with every step forward, that dream came closer to being realized. The legacy of Elon Musk wasn't just about the missions to Mars, the electric cars, or the solar roofs. It was about the idea that anything was possible if you were willing to take risks, to fail, and to keep going. Musk had proven that the future wasn't something that just happened, it was something you had to create. And as the years passed, that idea became the foundation of the world Musk had helped build, a world where the impossible was within reach, and where the stars were no longer just a dream, but a destination. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?